Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Bethany Swatton, and I'm the president of the Sports and Entertainment Law Society here at the West Virginia University College of Law. On behalf of all of us, we are proud to present to you today the evolution of street knowledge, hip-hop's influence on law and culture. First, we'd like to express our gratitude to all of our sponsors who helped make this possible: Dean McConnell and the West Virginia University College of Law, the West Virginia University Center for Black Culture and Research, the West Virginia University Festival of Ideas, the American Constitution Society, Walters Kluwer Aspen Publishing, Westlaw, Lexis, West Virginia University's Office for Social Justice, the West Virginia University College of Law Black Law Student Association, and the West Virginia University College of Law Student Bar Association. Lastly, the Sports and Entertainment Law Society would like to extend a special thank you to Professor Andre Cummings. Without his tireless effort and commitment, we would not be able to pull this symposium off. Over these next 2 days, we will be examining the influence that hip-hop has had on both law and culture. The cultural effects are obvious. Hip-hop has influenced everything from the songs that we sing to the clothes that we wear. Since hip-hop emerged from the South Bronx in the 1970s, it has become an international, multi-billion-dollar phenomenon. It has grown to encompass more than just rap music. Hip-hop has created a culture that incorporates ethnicity, art, politics, fashion, technology, and urban life. Hip-hop, since its inception, has been an outlet and a way of dealing with the hardships of life for, and particularly, minorities in America. And although hip-hop has often been spotlighted for negative publicity, it has positively affected many youth and encouraged them to voice their opinions on world and personal issues. So where does the law come in? Hip-hop intersects with law from the contracts written between the artists and the recording companies to the property rights and the images and the music. Hip-hop has dramatically impacted U.S. copyright law and fair use principles through its use of sampling. And with the advent of file sharing and the ever-changing nature of the music industry, hip-hop is constantly evolving its corporate nature to adjust to the changing times. We will examine this and much more over these next 2 days. We are honored to be featuring some of the brightest legal minds in the area of hip-hop and the law. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dean Joyce McConnell, the 16th Dean of the West Virginia University College of Law. Dean McConnell is also the William J. Mayer Jr. Dean and Thomas R. Goodwin Professor of Law at the West Virginia University College of Law. She teaches mainly in the area of property, and Dean McConnell is a nationally recognized scholar on domestic violence. Dean McConnell was featured in the Georgetown University's Alumni Law Center's clinical program and graduate teaching fellowship for 2007. She received the West Virginia University Law Review Outstanding Faculty Contribution Award in 2003-2004 and the West Virginia Law Review Outstanding Faculty Contribution Award in 2006-2007. Dean McConnell.
Welcome to West Virginia University College of Law and the symposium, The Evolution of Street Knowledge, Hip-Hop's Influence on Law and Culture. West Virginia University College of Law is proud to be a public law school within a large public research university. Both the university and the College of Law are deeply committed to diversity and deeply committed to cutting-edge interdisciplinary research and scholarship. Today's symposium, The Evolution of Street Knowledge, Hip-Hop's Influence on Law and Culture, reflects both of these commitments, diversity and cutting-edge scholarship, bringing together diverse scholars across disciplines. The West Virginia University College of Law encompasses and embraces cultural, racial, gender, religious, and sexual orientation diversity. It now has a 15% student minority population. Two comparisons will help you understand the depth of this number and how it demonstrates our commitment to diversity. First, compare our 15% minority enrollment at this law school in a state where our minority population is only 3%. We are proud of this achievement, which places us above almost all other public law schools in states with much higher minority populations. I want to particularly thank the students who have helped in these recruitment efforts, but I also would like to thank Professor Andre Cummings, who since arriving at our College of Law has committed himself to increasing the diversity here, and today you get to see the success of his hard work and of the support of the students that he organizes and drives. One look at our various student groups also gives you a glimpse of the diversity of our students. The Black Law Students Association, the Asian Pacific Law Student Association, Outlaw, the Christian Law Student Association, the Jewish Law Student Association, the International Law Student Association, and probably about 100 more that I could mention. That might be a slight exaggeration, but which would give you a sense of the diversity and vibrancy of the College of Law. In addition to our vibrant and diverse student body, we are building a diverse faculty. In addition to Professor and former Justice Kweli, who's been with us since 1969, Professor Judith Scully, who joined us in 96, and Professor Will Rhee, who joined us this year in August '08, we welcome 2 new professors who will join our faculty in August, Professor Atiba Ellis and Professor Jenna Martin, both of whom are here with us today and participating in the symposium. Welcome. At West Virginia University College of Law, we are committed to providing a forum for deep intellectual engagement around issues of discrimination and power. We take a stand on tough issues, such as racial equality, by bringing it out in the open and making it the subject of symposia, such as the one we have today. Holding this symposium on hip-hop music, something that many would not identify with the state of West Virginia, is further proof that our law school is a step ahead of traditional thinking and willing to push boundaries of understanding through education. For this opportunity, we thank Professor Andre Cummings and the College of Law Sports and Entertainment Law Society, and particularly the president of the society, Ms. Bethany Swatton. I also would like to take a moment to thank some of the other units across campus and other organizations, mostly because I think by mentioning these organizations, you will get a sense of how cutting edge our interdisciplinary work is. First, I'd like to thank the University Center for Black Culture and Research and its director, Marjorie Fuller, the President's Office of Social Justice, the President's Office of Festival of Ideas, the American Constitution Society for Law and Policy, the West Virginia University College of Law Black Student Association, the College of Law Student Bar Association, the College of Law Outlaw, and many other student groups. I think that these groups are important in demonstrating the degree to which our students are engaged and our campus is engaged in cutting-edge issues across disciplines. I welcome you to this absolutely spectacular symposium. I hope you enjoy yourselves over the next 2 days.
This time I'd like to bring up Marjorie Fuller from the Center for Black Culture and Research here at the West Virginia University to say a couple brief remarks.
Good afternoon. I'm here to do what I was told was a welcome, so I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. But I tend to be a little bit long-winded, so it's really going to be an effort for me because I am very happy to be here. The WVU Center for Black Culture and Research is very proud to be a part of this event, and we applaud Dean Joyce McConnell for having the vision to encourage Dr. Cummings and Dr. Dixon or Mr. Rob Dixon, to work together with us. Yes. And with all of the other generous supporters to organize this symposium. I don't think it's escaped anybody's notice that this is an unprecedented time in our history. We are coming together as a nation and as a world. And although we are not naive enough to believe that all of our problems have now miraculously been solved, we have, for the first time in a long time, hope. Hope that things will indeed get better. Hope that all of the dreams of our predecessors will be realized, if not in our lifetimes, in our children's. As I watched the inauguration of our 44th president, I was overcome with how much progress America has made. I was proud to be an American, and I felt a kinship with all other Americans that I have never really felt before. It was clear to me that I was witnessing a new era being born, and that I would remember where I was at that moment for the rest of my life. But I also realized that with any birth, there is the responsibility to nurture what has been born. We must nurture and protect this new place in which we now live. We must never forget that what is not fed will die. And with that, I also realized that the WVU Center for Black Culture and Research must take its responsibility to nurture our community very seriously. We must continue to provide quality educational programs. We must still provide support and advocacy and research opportunities for students, faculty, and staff. And we must continue to reach out into the broader surrounding community and develop relationships. We still have a lot of work to do. We at the Center invite all of you to visit us and become a part of our vision. We look forward to meeting you. And again, we are very proud to be a part of this symposium today. We feel that it is a very important part of the work that we do, and I welcome you here. And I am glad to see each and every one of you because I know that you will gain something very important today. Thank you very much.
And at this time, I'd like to bring up Emily Chatterjee from the American Constitution Society, another one of our primary sponsors.
Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Chatterjee, and I'm with the American Constitution for Law and Policy in Washington, D.C., and we're one of the co-sponsors of this great symposium. On behalf of ACS, I'd like to join Dean McConnell and Director Fuller in thanking Professor Cummings and the other organizers for putting together this thought-provoking event. For those of you who don't know, ACS is a legal organization dedicated to promoting a progressive vision of the Constitution and the law. To quote from our mission statement, ACS believes that law can and should be a force for improving the lives of all people. We are revitalizing and transforming legal and policy debates in classrooms, courtrooms, legislatures, and the media. And we are building a diverse and dynamic network of progressives dedicated to justice. ACS is delighted to be a part of this great event, and we look forward to some great presentations and discussions over the course of the next 2 days. So let us begin. Thanks so much.
Welcome to our first panel, When MCs Meet JDs, Hip-Hop's Complex Relationship with Intellectual Property. My name is Will Rhee. I am an associate professor at the College of Law, and I will be moderating this panel. Imitation may be the sincerest form of flattery, but it is a source of much litigation in copyright law. In the $29 billion world of hip-hop music, the dictates of copyright law often conflict with the cultural and artistic norms of hip-hop. We are honored to have 4 distinguished panelists, or 4 coming, I think, 3 right now, 4 coming, who are writing cutting-edge scholarship in this area. Professor Sherry Burr was unfortunately unable to join us. Severe weather conditions kept her plane from landing last night, and unfortunately she had to be diverted back to New Mexico. So please allow me to briefly introduce our 4 panelists, and I'll tell you what they'll be talking about. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Professor Anderson, because I think he'll be here shortly. So moving from your left to your right, first, Professor Funmi Arwa is a graduate of Harvard, Harvard Law, the University of Michigan, and the University of California, Berkeley, where she received her PhD. She is currently an associate professor at Northwestern. Prior to becoming a lawyer, she was an economic officer in the U.S. Foreign Service. Professor Arawa will discuss the implications of hip-hop as an innovative musical form within the context of broader challenges that musical innovation and music technologies have posed for copyright law frameworks more generally. Professor Arawa will need to leave after her remarks to catch a flight. Second, Professor Tanya Evans-Walls is a graduate of Howard Law and Northwestern. She is currently an assistant professor at the Widener-Harrisburg campus. She was a professional tennis player and has authored 2 books of poetry and recorded a companion spoken soul CD. Professor Evans-Walls will discuss the real and burgeoning impact of hip-hop as an art form on copyright law and fair use principles. Our third panelist, who will be hopefully joining us shortly, is Professor Horace Anderson. He is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Law School and Wharton. He is currently an associate professor at Pace. He worked with the international law firm White & Case and has consulted with companies on business strategy. Professor Anderson will discuss the incompatibility of the recording industry's approach to enforcement of its intellectual property rights with the cultural norms of hip-hop. Concluding our panel will be Professor Akila Folami, a graduate of Columbia Law and Spelman. She is currently an associate professor at Hofstra. She has testified in front of the Federal Communications Commission concerning the effect of the media consolidation in broadcast radio on American youth. Professor Folami will discuss how gangster rappers, who are primarily young urban black men, navigate the mass media and rap's commercialization of the gangster image to continue to provide seeds of political expression and resistance to that image through the lenses of Habermas's ideal public sphere and the Telecommunications Act of 1996. I will then briefly summarize the panelists' remarks and open the floor to questions. So I'm now pleased to give the floor to Professor Arawa.
This afternoon. I wanted to first start by thanking Professor Andre Cummings for his persistence in reminding me that I needed to come to this conference because it's a very important conference. Things often get lost in my email, and he was very patient with me while I sort of sorted out my schedule. I also wanted to thank the faculty, students, and staff at here at West Virginia Law School that helped put this conference together. I'm going to start out by giving you a little bit of background. The title of my paper is roughly Authorizing Hip-Hop, and I want to talk a bit about law and musical innovation. And I'll start out by giving you a bit of background. I'm an anthropologist. I was an anthropologist long before I was a lawyer. So a lot of my work reflects my anthropological roots. And I'm going to focus a bit on the cultural context of both music and law and what the implications of that are for hip-hop. And I want to make you aware that this is part of a bigger project where I'm looking at African-American influenced music more generally. So I have some other work on blues music as well as on George Gershwin that is also a part of this project. So some of that may come into my discussion today. So in terms of thinking about legal and cultural authority, there are 2 key issues I want to focus on in the presentation and come back to. One is, what is our conception of who is an authorized creator? The second issue is, what types and methods of creation are actually authorized within legal frameworks that can to some extent determine who can create what? I'll come back to that point as well. First of all, I want to talk about, in legal discussions of creation, there's often a disjuncture between how lawyers think about creation and how creators may think about creation. For instance, in law and copyright, we have this conception of copying. And we tend, as lawyers, and I say this, I'm putting my musician hat on sometimes because I have a lot of experience with classical singing. So I come to this sort of partly as a musician, partly as a lawyer. In law, when we talk about copying, we tend to think about copying as being very black and white. Now, I like to contrast that with the cultural studies fields. For instance, if you look at musicology, there are many, many, many more words that are used to talk about copying. And I have a list of some of the words that you see in the musicology field. When musicologists talk about how do we look at two composers and figure out how they're related, they might use the word influence. They might talk about indebtedness, emulation, homage, modeling, paraphrase, allusion, recomposition, quotation, and they may also talk about transformative imitation. Now, as lawyers, we may understand transformative imitation because I'm sure is going to come up in later discussions of fair use. That's a criteria for determining whether something constitutes a fair use. But you can tell there are a lot more words in musicology to describe what many lawyers would refer to as copying. But now that creates problems when we try to translate actual acts of creation and try to interpret them from a legal perspective. Because in law, copyright means you shouldn't copy. But the reality is everyone copies in creation. That's a norm. Copying is actually a norm of creation. And this is not just true in hip-hop. I really want to emphasize that point. In a lot of legal discussions of hip-hop, they sort of say, well, one of the reasons why hip-hop people aren't real musicians is that they copy. Real musicians like Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, well, they didn't copy. They sat in an attic somewhere and created their works, and they were absolutely not related to anything else because they were geniuses. And I think we need to move away from that assumption about copying, because the reality is we don't really know whether Mozart copied. People, musicologists that study Mozart know that he copied, but I sure don't know a lot of people that composed around the same time as Mozart, and not many living people today who aren't professional musicians actually do, because the slice of music we get after even 50 years is very limited. So we don't really know about the broader context of performance and creation during the time that Mozart created. A lot of times in court cases, because we valorize classical music composition so much, I'm going to talk about what that means. The classical tradition today, in many respects, is no longer a living tradition, where people are borrowing and creating new music freely. There's considerable evidence that Mozart, for instance, Beethoven, Bach, all of the three greats of classical music, as well as a lot of other people we no longer remember today, borrowed very freely and treated their music as if it were part of a living tradition. Because we now valorize it, we sort of, if you go to a classical, and this is a discussion, just as an aside, I often have discussions about this with my voice teacher, because I'll say, if you're performing a classical piece, well, there's one piece of music that I'm working on where we actually have a living recording with the singer and the composer, and the living recording does not comport 100% to the music. And I'll say, well, should I sing it as I hear it, or should I sing it as written? And the answer I always get back is you have to sing it as written, because that's the norm. In classical training, that's often the norm. Now, that's changing a bit as things like improvisation are getting reintroduced to the classical tradition. That's really changing. But the thing to think about is up until the late 19th century, the classical tradition included improvisation. So people improvised all the time. All of the great composers improvised. We often think about, when we think about improvisation, we think about jazz. Because in the classical music tradition, you don't really learn, although again, that's changing, improvisation so much. But that's just our assumptions about how people create and what sort of authorized creation is all about. So coming back to hip-hop, a lot of court cases that talk about hip-hop are based in this assumption that somehow copying is antithetical to creativity and innovation. And I think at root, that's at root the problem with a lot of assumptions about who should be an authorized creator. Because the reality is the copying that we see in hip-hop through sampling has been a pervasive aspect of music in all musical genres and all time periods. That's what musicologists say, and I take them as the experts on things like that. The musicologists say that. So the recognition of musical borrowing can then be used to shape our understanding of how copyright should apply in different contexts. So in law, we often have what I refer to as this assumed high culture model of creation, which is this model that, autonomous creators, Mozart's, Beethoven's, created these works. They were great works. They created them alone. They didn't copy. And that, because we're so far removed in time, we don't recognize sort of the influences on their works. And so our view of copying in law is based on a profound misreading of the classical music tradition. Hip-hop is a representative of a living music tradition where there's active borrowing of things we hear, things we know, things we relate to. The fact that classical music has moved away from that, we need to recognize that and reshape our views of copying and copyright to reflect the real tradition of musical borrowing. So I think returning to hip-hop, I think one way to see hip-hop is the latest in a long series of types of African-American influenced, African-American based musical performances that have been a core aspect of musical innovation much of the 20th century. We could go down through the list if you talk about from ragtime to blues to jazz to rhythm and blues. We'd all have different lists if we came up with our list. But there's this very long range of African-American musical forms that have been a core aspect of musical innovation in much of the 20th century. In fact, musicologist Susan McClary suggests that increasingly we're seeing in the West the displacement of Western-based musical forms by musical forms that are based on African-American and African music. And the reason that's significant is that I think if we look at these living music traditions that are now becoming increasingly dominant in popular music and other areas, they may reflect varied models of creation. For instance, Skip Gates and James Sneed have talked a lot about repetition and revision as being a core aesthetic in certain aspects of African American music, literature, cultural production. That reflects an ethos of borrowing. Now, that's not to say that African Americans are the only people that borrow or that other people don't borrow. That's just to say that given that we're seeing a broader displacement of or a broader distribution of African American based musical forms, it poses important challenges to the assumptions we make in our copyright structures. In copyright, we don't have a good way to deal with borrowing, and this manifests itself in two particular ways. First of all, with respect to allocations of rights. How should rights be allocated from a copyright perspective, and how should benefits be distributed? This is obviously a problem in copyright more generally, but it's a particular problem with living music traditions where there's a lot of borrowing. And I think the place we see this most acutely in the 20th century was with respect to blues music. For instance, a lot of early blues singers didn't get much compensation for their works. Part of that was there were broader sociocultural structures that excluded them from the benefits of what they created. Underlying that is a real disjuncture in copyright between the ways people create, the business structures that have emerged around copyright, and the ways we conceptualize creation. The other area where there are discrete questions or problems from a copyright perspective go back to this question of who has authority to borrow, because copyright basically determines who can use what type of cultural products. Now, the assessment that was made in blues in the early 20th century basically meant that a lot of blues performers didn't end up getting copyrights in their works for a lot of long, complicated reasons that I won't go into in this paper. But in terms of who had authority to use their work, a lot of people in rock and roll, a lot of rock and roll singers, particularly in Britain, actually ended up using a lot of the works of blues performers and really not compensating much. And Robert Johnson is sort of an exceptional case because he did get compensated, but I think that's a very unusual case and certainly not the norm. So I think two questions, these allocation of rights and these notions of who has cultural authority to modify and use existing works are fundamentally at the core of copyright. Now, I know other people are going to talk about fair use today, so I'm not going to really focus very much on fair use. A couple of thoughts on fair use. Our current rule in copyright is essentially a property rule. There are some exceptions. There are some liability rule aspects of copyright law, such as compulsory license. But a property rule means to use an existing copyrighted work, you either need permission or it has to constitute a fair use, essentially. If you don't get permission, even if in reality, if you think it's a fair use, either way, you're probably still going to get sued. But you have some defense, right? If it really constitutes a fair use, you have some defense. Now, the problem with this property rule is that it may dissuade a lot of types of creation where people are using existing work. First of all, because from a business structure perspective, if people can't clear rights, people are very uncomfortable letting you use existing work unless they can clear it because they don't want to get sued. So even though fair use, this is my view, and I know that some people disagree with this. I had a long talk with one of my colleagues about this issue. I would argue in the music context, fair use doesn't accomplish that much in many instances because of the potential chilling effect, because if you try to rely on fair use, you know you're going to get sued. We know that in a hip-hop context, a copyright interpretation that says you have to get permission has affected what kinds of works people can create. Thinking about Public Enemy and the kind of sort of collages that they did, that given the current licensing standards in hip-hop, that type of work would be very hard to produce. And so we know that copyright has an influence on how people create. How we interpret copyright has an influence on how people create. If we have a model of creation that is significantly different from the models of, if we have a model of creation in copyright that's significantly different than the models of creation that creators use, there's a disjuncture, and we're not going to get the right allocations of rights. We're also not going to get the kind of production, the kind of innovative production that copyright is actually intended to enhance, to promote, to encourage. So I would argue that we have conflicting legal views in terms of cultural conceptions. So how do people create? Do people create autonomously, or do people create using borrowing? Certainly some people do follow this sort of more, what I call, autonomous sort of classical model of creation. The reality is not many classical musicians follow it. Certainly not many musicians today follow that model. So if we look in the classical tradition, some classical composers were much more like George Frederick Handel, who used a lot of borrowing. And in fact, in the 19th century, when standards had changed, a lot of people started to call him a plagiarizer because he borrowed so much. So I think we need to have much more acceptance for a broader range of creativity, some of which is much more borrowing intensive, and some of which isn't. And that partly reflects aesthetic choices. Some people are much more inspired by different types of work. One way to interpret Handel, for instance, is that he just liked to use other people's works. And for some reason, he got creative inspiration from it. I don't think in law we should make decisions about what's right and wrong with respect to that. We need to really have much broader recognition of what I refer to as competing cultural models in terms of how people produce. And that, I think, is a key to real cultural vibrancy, because one of the things we saw in the classical tradition after the late 19th century is that a vibrant tradition essentially became a museum tradition because people could no longer change it. And that has really serious cultural implications, because I'm an anthropologist, right? We want living cultural traditions. It's a good idea. Culture is vibrant. People can use it. It's spread. That's what culture is all about. Culture is often not intended to be in a museum. Sometimes this notion of autonomous cultural creation can veer towards thinking about cultural artifacts of culture as museum pieces that shouldn't be touched, that shouldn't be changed. Now, that's one way to view culture, and certainly some kinds of culture that might be more amenable to, but in the musical arena, I don't think that really works very well. So I think we should be careful about dissuading those kinds of models from a legal perspective. The second issue is that we have what I refer to as competing business models. And this is something that the digital era has really brought to the forefront, because you have sort of the old media that's based in this assumption of copyright that was to some extent more workable in the past because they controlled the distribution channel. Today, that model is not so workable because creators and consumers have many more options for purchasing, creating music, and other types of cultural works. So the digital era brings sort of these conflicts in cultural models and conflicts in business models to a head. And it has implications for existing structures. So I think one reason we're seeing so many battlefields in the cultural front, and hip-hop music was really the first of the cultural industries to confront the digital era, right? And sampling was at the forefront of the battle because it was one of the really first areas where we saw this new digital technology, with digital sampling at least, this new digital technology. How do we sort of figure out how to sort it out from a copyright perspective? I think we're going to continue to see these battles as long as our copyright models are based on narrow assumptions about creativity. So I argue in all my work, we need to recognize broader notions of creativity and really figure out how to enable that from a copyright perspective. I tend to suggest we perhaps need more liability rule frameworks. That's not the only way, certainly, to do it, but I think it would certainly be a step in the right direction. So as we think about battles with respect to mashups, things on YouTube, we really need to come back to this concept of the really competing models about who can create and how they could create. And in order to really sort through some of these battles, we really need to come back to recognition of the many varieties of types and manners of creation in things that that tend to be protected by copyright. I'm going to leave it there because I'm hoping to have some questions before I leave. Shall I? Oh, no, I meant so everyone could finish, because I don't have to do it. I want to hear everything.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. That's what I like to hear from my class and from you. Good afternoon. I want to thank very much the moderator of our panel, Will Ree. He organized this in a wonderful fashion, and everything from beginning, middle, and undoubtedly end, I think is exceptional. So I tip my proverbial hat off to you all because this is an exceptional conference and it's important. And I just wanted to mention that. And certainly, and most notably to my fellow Howard University School of Law alum, Dre Cummings. I see some familiar faces, including I had a moment. I'm a property and intellectual property professor, and I see my property professor somewhere lurking out here. So I had a moment. Professor, good to see you, sir. I'm prepared today. And of course, I'm honored to serve on this very distinguished and timely and dynamic panel because of the topic. So who am I briefly in my perspective? What do I bring to the table? As was mentioned, I bring my remarks today both from a left-brained but also a right-brained perspective because of the somewhat eclectic roots that I have and my path to law school and ultimately through large law firms and ultimately to academia. Before going to law school, I did compete professionally on the women's tennis circuit. During law school, I ran Verbal Herb, which was an amazing collective of hip-hop heads, spoken word artists, and the like, and it was very much my balance so that I could show up to Property prepared and sit in the front row and do well, but also to provide the balance and the context for life. And I think it's important just to understand what creativity, the impact, just from a global perspective, or I should say a more broad perspective, as we talk specifically about hip-hop, but it's important because it informs everything about our lives. It makes us balanced and whole and able to share with each other and the gifts that I believe that the Creator blesses. So I just wanted to, from a broader perspective, say why it's even important that we're here. But we also approach it from a legal perspective and what the legal implications are of the culture of hip-hop and the tools of the counterculture, I would say, of hip-hop in terms of mashups and sampling and looping and the like. So I'm going to take a step back a bit just to inform exactly from a more basic perspective what we're really talking about here. So as Professor Reed mentioned, I will focus my remarks on the impact of hip-hop as an art form on the law as well as the law on hip-hop, because it certainly goes both ways. We're talking about sampling and loops of samples, and I'll say what that is because sometimes I think that we use the terminology without really giving an idea of what it is that we're talking about. And all of these tools, I would say, are used to create new and transformative musical works using portions or the entirety of copyrighted works. And so I'm going to explore the legal and artistic consequences in the world of hip-hop when such use is done without the permission of the copyright owner. And finally, I'll raise some questions, probably to tee up the colleagues who have not yet shared as we explore enforcement of intellectual property laws versus the cultural norms of hip-hop, hip-hop's musical innovation that we've already heard about, and hip-hop and the Telecom Act, and the overall contributions of leading hip-hop artists on the law as it relates to entertainment generally. And my scholarship and research post-symposium will actually explore the social justice implications that licensing requirements have on the ability of historically non-propertied and marginalized creative classes of people to participate fully and equally in musical expression and the creative process. Is it really thwarting what we have heard as this very participatory blending and borrowing of information that exists to create something that's new and transformative? And I certainly believe that is what hip-hop does. So what are we talking about here? What are sampling, looping, and mashing? Basically, I may be preaching to the converted, but bear with me. With sampling, you're talking about a recording of a sound or a portion of a previously existing sound with the aid of some type of device, computer technology that stores the recording. It has greater implications now. We've gone from the old school tape and the mixtape to that perfect digital copy that really wasn't contemplated by the law. And such is the extraction and the combination of existing copyrights with some form of new expression that creates some type of new and independent work, that being a derivative work if you're following copyright principles. That right is one of the bundle of rights that is held exclusively by the owner of the copyright of the sampled work, pursuant to Section 106 of the Copyright Act. A sample is technically, quote, rearranged, remixed, or otherwise altered in sequence or quality. So when we talk about sampling, that's what the problem is using it without the authorization or permission of the copyright owner. Looping, playing a sample over and again, thus looping it. The repetition of a section of music, often the repetition of a sampled section to form some type of new rhythm. And mashing, there's so many definitions and expressions of it, but it probably in its purest form, it's mixing from the perspective of music, mixing together the lyrics from one song and the music from another, mashing them together to, again, create something new. Jay-Z's 99 Problems is a good example. So from the perspective of the Copyright Act, the sampling artist is expected to license the right to use the copyrighted work and to presumably pay a fee. In my practice, certainly even seeing the original copyright owner participating in copyright ownership of the new derivative work, percentages based upon the value of the song. The original copyright owner will usually also receive some type of advance against future royalties. Again, the business model varies from situation to situation, but there is both permission and some form of compensation that's usually involved. So that's an example of what can happen when permission is sought and granted. The industry above the table, as it were, honors a licensing system, and it's extremely expensive, time-consuming, and quite contrary to the artistic flow that has already been mentioned when you deal with the two levels of what creativity, I believe creativity are. First, the ability to express it fully in and of yourself, and then the beauty of being able to have a shared experience of some artistic form and thus a mutual sharing of that transformation. But those who cannot afford to participate in that way, or who choose not to do so for creative reasons, or the whole nature of hip-hop as a counterculture against existing norms, that practice is not something that they would participate in, and this is where we have our problem. Continuing to use copyrighted work of others in unauthorized fashion, particularly on the underground level, at local and regional levels, continuing to sample and the like, and distributing it through mixtapes, EPs at the underground, local, or regional level. But it's precisely that divide that keeps those at the quote-unquote underground level who may wish to participate in a mainstream music industry that may be left behind, whether by choice or by the fact of the Copyright Act and some of the onerous provisions that don't allow for the sharing and the borrowing that we've spoken of. So what's the issue? We'll talk about what is required and when, what impact this has on the ability of the culture of hip-hop to actually thrive and continue to grow as the living form that we've talked about already, and whether the laws have a disparate impact on hip-hop artists. If so, where we go from here. And I think you'll hear some more of that today from other panelists. But generally speaking, any use of a copyrighted work that is neither de minimis, and I'll talk a moment about what that means, particularly and actually exclusively in the case of musical compositions, or fair in the case of both musical compositions and sound recordings. Anything absent that would require permission. So the art of sampling, looping, mashing, and I certainly use the term art intentionally, contemplates in most cases that the copyrighted musical composition, and in some cases the sound recordings. So accordingly, there are two classes of copyright owners at issue here. And sometimes we have the failing of producers, since we're talking about hip-hop, but we can talk about this more broadly as well, about where permission lies and who holds the keys to actually having use. The musical composition describes the music and the lyrics, the performance art, the PA form dealing with a musical composition that is separate and apart from the actual performance that's embodied in a CD or an LP, which would be the sound recording. So there are really two levels of licensing that occurs when you're dealing with this, something having to do with the lyrics and the music, and also dealing with the sound recording, which would be a separate registration, an SR. I'll refer to the first as a PA and the second as an SR. And sometimes hip-hop artists and or producers fail to appreciate, or maybe appreciate and take the business risk of going forward and not seeking permission of one or the other. And I think it probably has the greatest impact on composers, but certainly there's an issue at the SR or sound recording level. But oddly enough, sound recordings receive greater protection than the underlying work. So when do we seem to have a clear case of infringement, or when is the use due to some argument of de minimis use or fair use? When does it render that use permissible? And first I want to focus on the underlying musical work and what the clear cases of infringement seem to be, particularly in the line of cases that I will mention briefly. Time probably won't let us go through the whole history, and it may come up in other presentations. But As it relates to the musical work, certainly you can focus on the chorus. That would be one of the clearer cases of infringement of an underlying musical work. You could also focus on the phrases of a musical composition that tends to be distinctive and memorable, and which would be a reason that a hip-hop artist would probably use it and incorporate it into their own work. There are all sorts of wonderfully artistic and creative reasons that people use this technology or these tools, but it also can be used in a lazy fashion as well to get something out and get something quick and bite, as we used to say back in the day, off of something that's already popular, to have people have that recognition even if they can't immediately identify the sampled piece. And then 3 would be parts that are clearly identifiable. So it may not be the chorus or it may not be some other hook, but some part that's clearly identifiable for some sampled work. And oftentimes that's referred to as the heart of the matter, even if you can't couch it in terms of a chorus. And then there's some clearly non-infringing uses, although the basic limit renders itself to short phrases of music, and how short is too short, and are we going to start counting at this point, and 6 and the 4 and the whatever. But you know, if it's 1 or 2, there are only a limited number of ways that a short number of notes can be expressed. So copyright protection would not be available for extremely short phrases of music, 1, 2, you know, the closer you get to 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's certainly famous case law that deals with that. And then infringement of the sound recording. Copyright law seems to have broader protection for sound recordings, again, the performance that's embodied in the disc or the LP, than for the musical compositions that underlie, or the underlying musical composition. The Act at 114B states that the exclusive rights of the owner of copyright in a sound recording do not extend to the making or duplication of another sound recording that consists entirely of an independent fixation of other sounds, even though such sounds imitate or simulate those in the copyrighted sound recording. What does that mean? Basically, it gives you the right to cover a song. As long as you are performing it with your own instruments in your own way, you can cover a tune, and 114B allows for that. However, the language suggests, and we certainly have case law that says that actual copying of any sounds of an existing sound recording would constitute infringement of the sound recording. And it doesn't appear to be any room at all for fair use of a sound recording, although you can establish fair use for the underlying composition. So this creates additional problems when we have a hip-hop artist or producer who wants to sample the actual recording without bringing in studio musicians and runs afoul of 114B. So in order to avoid this and comport with copyright law, an artist or producer would have to recreate the sound, again, with studio musicians instead of taking it directly from the sound recording. The relevant line of cases, and again, I think this will come up a little bit later as well, we certainly start, we could go back further, but basically for our purposes today with the Bismarcky case and Grand Upright, Biz was sued for sampling sounds from a Gilbert O'Sullivan song, used the sample not in a way that suggested it was his own, right, or that he was trying to, pass it or pawn it off as his own, or that it was even some derivation of it, but that he believed, and it certainly was the culture of the time to believe, that it was not some type of unauthorized use because there was this new and transformative thing, borrowing from many existing things to make something new. And the court said he was wrong. And also brought in, what commandment is that? I believe it's the 7th commandment. Yes, thou shalt not steal, right? So we went above and beyond copyright law and actually brought God into it, which was frightening. And then we kind of move on to Newton v. Diamond, and that's with the Beastie Boys, where de minimis copying was actually found in that particular case. Basically, there were samples being taken directly from a record. The artist would pay the sound recording owner, but not the owner of the underlying musical work, and that was basically the issue there. The court ended up explaining that the average audience would not discern Newton's hand as a composer and found de minimis use in that case, and so it was permissible. And then we head down to Bridgeport Music, which came back and found that the de minimis defense is not appropriate in the case of sound recordings. So what's the current state of the law for music compositions? I frame this more in terms of questions than answers, but first of all, there's certainly some fragmentation of the law as applied, certainly unclear definitions and distinctions for what constitutes de minimis use, what is the definition and the impact of something that's transformative. Oftentimes it's used in the discussion of the first of the four factors of the fair use analysis and how that plays a part, whether it be a separate discussion or whether fair use factors still have to be articulated even when you find some transformative use. The requirement of originality, which is also something that you talk about a great deal in your writing, that seems to be at odds with the creative process, particularly for music, and whether or not the Copyright Act as set up at this point is clearly at odds. We know that it didn't even intend originally to contemplate music. It came much later after copyright had already been established for literary works, maps and charts and the like. So how do we, it always seems that the law is one step behind music and art and technology, and how to reconcile those things. So with that, I'm going to stop there so that we can hear from other panelists. But thank you for your time.
Okay. First, I want to say thank you to Dre, to Will, to West Virginia University Law School for having this event. People in New York, where I'm from, asked me why I was going to West Virginia for a symposium on hip-hop and the law, and I said, because they're doing it, and others are not. So I thank you all for having this event. And I thank my co-panelists for being here, because I'm going to explain in a minute where I come from in approaching the subject of this panel, and when you hear what I say, you'll realize why I say this. I'm always happy to get together with people to talk about hip-hop, so I'm glad you're here. I'm glad everybody is here. Here's where I come from when it comes to issues of hip-hop and intellectual property law in the United States. The very first piece of recorded music that I owned, right, that was mine, not my dad's, was Rapper's Delight. 12-inch, long version on one side, short version on the other side. Second piece of music I owned, also 12-inch single, was a record called The Adventures of Super Ron, for those of you who remember that one. First album I owned. Actually, was it? No, I didn't own that one. I taped it from my cousin. Run DMC I taped from my cousin. Criminal Minded I bought myself. And in fact, in true hip-hop fashion, I'm now going to plug my next joint. The work in progress that my talk is drawn from, I called Criminal Minded, and is going to be in the Tennessee Law Review anytime now. So I grew up with hip-hop, and also my family is from Jamaica and the West Indies. I also grew up with the sound system culture and the dancehall culture that influenced hip-hop in the 1970s. So it's been a part of my life for a long time. I also have been, not a very talented one in my opinion, an artist myself, not a hip-hop artist, not a rapper, but I have sung. I've trained classically, but sang jazz. And so I kind of understand with a lot of the people who I've been friends with over the years what creators do and how they approach what they do. And of course, I'm a lawyer and an IP professor. And so that informs the way I look at these issues as well. And my approach tends to be to understand the economics of what everybody involved is doing. The intellectual property owners, the creators, who unfortunately the way our music business has been structured in this country are often not the same persons. So when we talk about protecting the interests of copyright owners, we typically are not talking about protecting the interest of artists. And I tend to look at the incentives that they face and the trade-offs that they make in doing what they do. And ultimately, the opinion that I'm going to express today is that there are clear disconnects between the way that hip-hop creators approach what they do and the way the copyright law looks at what they do. And so copyright owners, who are not the artists by and large, are focused on imposing their view, which is fair, the law allows them to do that, without understanding the view coming from the other side. And my thesis is that if they understood the view from the other side and actually internalized it, they might help themselves out. And the specific example I use in the paper that I referenced a minute ago is the example of the mixtape DJ. Okay, I'm going to get to that in more detail in a few moments, but the mixtape DJ, at least for the about a year ago, was under attack anew by the recording industry. The RIAA was seeking, in cooperation with law enforcement authorities in Georgia, to use the criminal law to shut down mixtape DJs. So the Georgia RICO statute was used to arrest DJ Drama and DJ Don Cannon down in Georgia, basically using a criminal statute which made it a crime to offer for sale recorded music without listing all of the copyright owners of the music. And because they were doing it as a business, it was a corrupt organization under the RICO law, and they were arrested. So that's kind of where the specific example I'm going to end up with, to talk about the ways in which the recording industry, by not understanding where hip-hop is coming from, cuts off its nose to spite its face. So we've already had mention of the norms of hip-hop, right? It clearly has cultural norms that are both influenced by a much longer music tradition that reaches back to Africa, and in some ways back to Europe. And those norms are norms around the creation of music, how music gets performed, and how it gets distributed. And if you look at the history of hip-hop, to use the creation norms, right, it's not just that copying is prohibited, unauthorized copying is prohibited by the copyright law and is allowable in hip-hop. Hip-hop actually has a pretty nuanced vision of copying, right? You've got, on the one hand, sampling is good. Sampling is okay. Sampling is that sort of transformative use, to borrow from the fair use law, that is what this is all about, right? Taking your limited resources, borrowing from other people, and making something greater out of it. So sampling is good. Biting, not good. Okay? You don't take somebody else's lyrics and claim them as your own. That's copying, but we don't like that copying in hip-hop. Quoting or referencing somebody else is okay, right? When Jay-Z says in one of his songs, them rings and things you sing about, bring them out. It's hard to yell when the barrel's in your mouth. Everybody who knows hip-hop knows that's a Biggie Smalls line. Because everybody knows that, and they know that Jay-Z knows it, and they know that Jay-Z knows that they know it, he's not trying to pass it off as his own. He's doing honor to someone who has come before him. That's okay. Similarly, Mos Def borrowed heavily from Children's Story, a Slick Rick song, to create a song on the Black Star album. That was okay, right? Because we all knew where it was coming from. We knew he wasn't trying to pass it off as his own. Not being a writer. Lil' Kim used to be a really popular artist. Around the time that the Notorious B.I.G. died, her lyrics didn't seem the same anymore. And in many, I don't have any personal knowledge of this, but in many people's opinion, he had been writing her rhymes when he was alive. Not okay. You have to be a writer in your own right. You can sample from someone else's music. You can reference someone else's lyrics, as long as not passing them off on your own. But anything you're putting your name to as your own really has to be your own. So a very nuanced view of copying, which obviously at least obvious to me, is going to have a hard time being squared with, the exclusive rights of Section 106 of the Copyright Act. So there are norms about performance, there are norms about creation, there are norms about performance. Live performance is very important. Can you move the crowd, or are you just a studio rapper? KRS-One gets the respect that he gets, and this is a man who has not had a big seller in a lot of years, but he gets respect because of his ability to go into a live music venue and move the crowd. Those of you who have been to shows know that there's a lot of call and response in the shows. There are a lot of chants that are part of hip hop that you might sing at a show. It's part of the performance, right? The audience gets into it. Wave your hands in the air, put your hands in the air, wave them like you just don't care, so on and so forth. We've all heard those. So there are ways that we do hip hop in terms of how it's performed. And for purposes of this mixtape issue, there are norms regarding how hip hop is distributed that go back to the very beginning of its history. We now appreciate in the kind of mainstream marketing world what's called viral marketing, right? Not marketing that is the result of someone pushing a message out at people, but the people at a grassroots level passing the word along about a particular item. That's been going on since the 70s, right? The DJ, who was historically the most important part of the hip-hop group, right? Think about Eric B. and Rakim, okay? Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. It used to be that person got top billing in a hip-hop group. That person was how hip-hop was distributed, right? Or how music was distributed that kind of was related to hip-hop. You were a DJ in a club and you wanted to show off how you could mix, okay? You made a tape. That's the tape that you used to get gigs. The people who heard about your skill wanted that tape for themselves. They wanted to play it in their house, play it in their car, share it with their friends. So you made a copy of it and gave it to them. Eventually, you started selling it. That tape was the way that a lot of people discovered music that they had not heard before. A lot of the music, again, going back to my own kind of personal connection with hip-hop, before hip-hop truly went national, where you could turn on MTV and see music from any part of the country, right? Or turn on the radio in New York and hear music from Atlanta. I found out about groups like Two Live Crew because my cousins made a tape and said, here, this is what's going on in Miami. So the DJ was part of the way it was distributed back when it wasn't getting played on radio, it wasn't getting played on MTV, wasn't getting shelf space in stores. So because of that, that person is a very important figure as a tastemaker in hip-hop. And that, even with all the other changes in the music, that continues to this day. Okay? Getting on the right mixtape is important. Ask 50 Cent. Okay? He had no record deal after he got shot. He had nothing. They pulled away from it. They didn't want to be associated with that element. And he rebuilt his career not by sending a demo to a record company, but by putting mixtapes on the street. So the role of the mixtape DJ as arbiter, tastemaker, as a way of getting music into the hands of people who don't want to pay $20 for a CD that has maybe 2 good songs on it, just to use an example. But that person's role in distribution is part of the history and culture of hip-hop, is also part of what makes the intellectual property of the copyright holder valuable. Okay? In our kind of modern information economy, okay, there really is too much stuff out there for us to keep track of when we want to find something that will appeal to us. That's why Google exists. That's why YouTube exists. You can name any number of websites or entities that help us to make sense of what's out there in terms of information. Even as sales of music have declined over the past few years, the number of titles released every year has increased. how is somebody going to make sense of all of the information that's out there, even within just one genre of music? Those who help the marketplace kind of categorize what's out there and understand what's out there play a big role. There are artists I've discovered personally from mixtapes. And then from the mixtape, I said, well, this person is so good, I want to hear more. And then went and sought out that person's music. In the kind of sea of stuff that gets played or doesn't get played in kind of the mainstream promotional vehicles like radio and video, that sort of information gets lost. So these DJs like Funkmaster Flex and Clue and DJ Drama, they are actually adding value to the property owned by the copyright owners. Okay? They are putting their stamp of approval on what for a lot of consumers would be an unknown quantity. Who is this new artist you're trying to push at me? I don't have $20 to give you for somebody I don't know, but wait, that person is on DJ so-and-so's mixtape. Now I have a way to go and experience that music and see whether I want to experience more of it. So that's just one example, in my view, of where understanding where the music comes from, how it's made, and how it's consumed would actually help the recording industry, because I'm sure, and other copyright owners, because I'm sure that if they took a step back and thought through the role played by these DJs, there's a lot of money they could save in legal fees, and really kind of appreciating the value added to their property. For kind of future work that I want to do in terms of looking at other examples of where understanding more of the norms actually would lead to different behavior, hopefully, if they're rational. That's a big if. On the part of intellectual property owners, is looking at that kind of list of different types of copying that I described a few minutes ago, right? So once again, we've got a kind of a clear prohibition against unauthorized copying, just as there's a clear prohibition against unauthorized distribution, right? But if we look at hip-hop, it actually has, as I said, kind of a nuanced system of types of copying, and it's self-policing, right? Nobody sues somebody for biting. Biting carries with it its own punishment. Nobody gets worked up, and I'm making a little bit of a presumption here. A true kind of tribute type reference doesn't get people worked up. That kind of is taken for what it is and actually ends up enhancing the reputation of both artists. And we don't need to bring the courts into dealing with the fact that Jay-Z quoted from Biggie Smalls. So I have a sense that there are these lessons that can be learned in terms of a self-policing system that looks at copying in a nuanced way that would serve copyright owners better than using, I mean, pretty much the blunt instrument of the exclusive rights under 106. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Hi, I will join my panelists and commend the law school as well as having this conference. Really a bold thing and very phenomenal. Sorry, stole my introduction term to New York. Either way, I'm glad to have this conference. Period. Oh, my mic's not on, sorry. I'll also say I'm proud to be the mother of 2 children, proud to be a wife, a daughter, professor. But my claim to fame, I don't have classical training, but my claim to fame, 1985, Rhode Island Boys and Girls Club, winner of the rap contest. So I did have aspirations. No, I absolutely will not give a few bars or lyrics. My mother gently put those aspirations to rest, and hence MC Light stole my fame. Either way, so that's partially my introduction. I am from Providence, Rhode Island, and I fondly remember it took a while for us to get a hip-hop scene, if you will, in Rhode Island, but I do fondly remember late nights when my mother would went to bed late Friday nights, whipping out with the music box and extending the radio as long as I could, the wire, to pick up stations from New York and get some of those sounds into Rhode Island. And so that introduces my reflective ideas about hip-hop. How did we get here? And what do I mean by here? Here meaning, how did radio get here? How did hip-hop get to the current status of what it is? So that being said, how did we get to a radio station or atmosphere or culture where you can turn on any station whatsoever and hear a song, and if you miss the first part of it, you can turn to another station and catch the same thing, or hear the same thing over and over and over, played over and over again. And it's a particular sound. Why is it that you do not hear Talib, Kweli, or Common Sense on the radio station? So there's a particular image, the gangster image, which is what I explore, and I'll sort of pull apart some of the things that Willis said with my article. So my presentation relates to my article entitled From Habermas to Get Rich or Die Trying, Hip-Hop, the Telecommunications Act of 1996 in the Black Public Sphere. Before I begin, I'd like to note that I grappled with whether to exclude certain language used by many gangster rappers today, as it's offensive to both my political and personal sensibilities, but I chose to use those words, and although now I'm cognizant because I see little faces and little voices, so I'll be mindful of the terminology that I used and that I did express in the piece because it best reflected what they said. They express it as they choose to, but in presenting it to you, I'll be cognizant of our younger audience members. So in trying to pull apart what it is that we hear on the radio, there's this notion of there's good hip-hop or positive hip-hop and bad hip-hop, the gangster rap, right? The hip-hop scene, there's an underground positive social commentary hip-hop going on. But what you hear on the radio is something else, completely a commercialized, commodified version of hip-hop and hip-hop culture. So the goal of my article was threefold. To begin by situating hip-hop as a part and extension of the black public sphere, and I'll define the black public sphere in a minute. To explore how the current articulation of hip-hop through gangster rap still contains social commentary, despite its commercialization and commodification of the gangster image. And to then explore the extent to which the Telecommunications Act of 1996 has stifled the social commentary and resistance and discourse that was once found in hip-hop. In other words, what you now have is a de facto image of hip-hop because it populates and inundates the radio station. For the most part, it's the gangsta image, right? The bling bling, shoot 'em, kill 'em, the N, the F, blah, blah, blah. How did that come to be, and what way did the law affect that particular image? So let me step back a second and give you the theory. So who is Jürgen Habermas, and what is the public sphere? Well, Habermas is a well-known political scientist credited for his conceptualization of the public sphere. He focused on what he called the liberal bourgeois public sphere of 18th century England. The public sphere was where private individuals who were formerly excluded by feudal lords and from political decision-making deliberated and reasoned among themselves and constructed a political voice that served to challenge and subvert absolutist rule. He was less concerned with overt political change, like rebellion or even voting, if you will, or the physical space or locale of the public sphere, but was more focused on the ways in which change could be effectuated through the medium of talk and reasoned deliberation. The public sphere was to operate uninhibited by the state and the market, and the law was to be neutral and to facilitate discourse between the public sphere and the state. So what's the connection I'm making between Jürgen Habermas and hip-hop and gangster rapper 50 Cent's movie and lyrics by the same name, Get Rich or Die Trying? As I read about Habermas' vision of the public sphere, and more importantly, the vision of his critics, I could see the connection between hip-hop, at least initially, its inception, the cultural expression itself, as political expression calling attention to the otherwise marginalized voices of young, urban, black men and the larger American political discussion. See, American history is replete with black political and counter-hegemonic expression. And by that I mean a subversion, a reshaping of the norms, values, and beliefs of the dominant class. A history upon which hip-hop builds and expands. For example, Blacks challenged the dominant hegemonic public gaze by marching in dresses and suits during the civil rights movement, symbolizing visions of respectability. They also subverted the national views that blacks were devoid of intellect, with Martin Luther King Jr.'s eloquence and maneuvering within the media. Malcolm X subverted the views with regard to the urban ghetto. Hip-hop developed within the same context and history of maneuvering within the larger dominant public discussion. By the time hip-hop came along, the ghetto and its inhabitants had become invisible once again. There was a lull in political fervor and a hope in America's urban centers after the assassination of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and countless young black activists and Black Panthers. In the early 1980s, as federal aid to America's larger post-industrial cities was cut and jobs were vanishing, the South Bronx would become what many would declare a wasteland. Many white residents were relocated, businesses moved elsewhere. Landlords abandoned buildings, and buildings were set on fire for insurance money. While the South Bronx was on fire, literally, politicians would adopt a public policy of benign neglect and declare that nothing of use would come out of the Bronx again. Within this context, black male youth, through hip-hop, forged a counter-hegemonic message, first with the beat, then through breakdancing, graffiti, where youth tagged nicknames on government property and made themselves visible outside of the Bronx on their own terms, and finally with rap, which were words spoken rhythmically over the beat, and that were not originally overtly political in content, but were counter-hegemonic nonetheless. Instead of rotting and dying out in a disintegrating city, rappers chose to survive, to live through the beat and the song. Hip-hop would prove that something of use would come out of the Bronx. It would make its way to the lower Manhattan art scene, on the Hollywood movies. Rap lyrics would soon contain direct social commentary of urban life. Some would call rap the Black CNN, highlighting what would not otherwise be seen regarding police brutality, poverty, and injustice in America's urban centers. From Public Enemy's "It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back" to NWA's "F the Police." Rappers challenged both black and white bourgeois norms. For example, some assert that rappers pried loose the designation of Nigger as an inherently pejorative term, so much so that now youth of different races use the redefined term, spelled Nigga, to refer to each other, and not necessarily in a negative way. And finally, a new identity would also emerge, one juxtaposed between the black bourgeois norm of capitalist enrichment and the Black Panther identification with the urban masses. Today, gangster rappers in particular have reaped considerable financial success, selling everything from the outlaw gangster image itself to cologne, vitamin water, clothes, shoes. As a result, critics contend that the corporate-created and mass-mediated gangster rapper is no longer counter-hegemonic. For cultural critic Tanisha Coates, like all nostalgia, the neo-gangsters stuck in history rather than reality. Although gangster rap could once fairly claim to reflect a brutal present of crack-filled streets and violent shootouts, now it is filled by America's myth of the menacing black man. Gangster rap today is about as reflective of reality as, well, a reality show. Habermas would more than likely agree that gangster rap and its commercialization signals a death of the black public sphere. To him, private interest and market infiltration of the media led to the demise of his idealized public sphere and seriously inhibit the development of a public sphere in modern times. Fortunately, many scholars have expanded upon Habermas's vision of the public sphere and have found political expression in many forms and places, including within the market. It is clear then that there is room within the black public sphere for many voices, even a commodified one. To such scholars, the market itself can be a site of contestation, and to ignore the market and mass media, as Habermas does, is to ignore the influence of media images on the shaping and reshaping of political identity. For example, scholar Rosemary Coombe has highlighted the recoding of mass-mediated cultural images by marginalized groups for their own purposes and agendas. She calls this recoding a subcultural practice, which is different from the countercultural movements of the 1960s. in that it recodes cultural signs rather than poses a revolutionary program of its own. Examples of such subcultural resistance includes the recoding of Bart Simpson in the early 1990s by members in the black community, where there was a black Bart seen on T-shirts and towels with phrases like, "It's a black thing. You just don't understand." Moreover, Kenneth Aoki argues that even negative and racialized images can be recoded because they are nothing more than signs thrown open for reinterpretation along reconfigured cultural, economic, and political agendas. Such recoding serves as a means of talking back to power on multiple levels, where subordinated individuals engage in transforming constructions of identity within the dominant discourse. He contends, though, that talking back may require what some have called a contradictory consciousness, a mixing of resignation and resistance. With regard to gangster rap and subverted resistance within the media, many have related the current phenomenon in which white male suburban youth are the primary purchasers of gangster rap to a voyeuristic gaze and consumption of black street culture. Studies have shown that the more rappers were packaged as violent black criminals, the bigger the white audiences became. Through gangster rap lyrics, rap voyeurs are taken to the ghetto, which for listeners is a place of adventure, unbridled violence, erotic fantasy, or an imaginary alternative to suburban boredom. Listeners are introduced through these lyrics to the ghettofied NIGGA persona, who more often than not is a gangster, making his money as a pimp, hustler, drug dealer, or killer, and the black woman who is the skis, the bee, the hoe, who is intent on bringing the gangster protagonist down. And in some ways, gangster rappers do participate in their own subjugation by recreating such corporate-created images through these lyrics. I assert, however, that there is still evidence, even in light of this resignation of resistance and a shifting of the dominant voyeuristic gaze. For example, in his movie Get Rich or Die Trying, in addition to the gangster images that predominate the movie with scenes of violent deaths where 50 Cent's movie mother her dead body is set ablaze and the teeth of another street hustlers are pulled out, and of excessive bling-blinging with 50 Cent riding down the street in his shiny new white BMW to the envy of all the local hustlers, there is also a slight shift in the gaze, even if brief, with scenes of 50 Cent drooling on himself and depressed over his inability to provide for himself, his girlfriend, and his son. There is also a brief scene of intimacy between him and his son's mother, which is rarely scripted in these melodramas of the gangster rap lyrics, and of engaging moments between 50 Cent, the father, and his infant son. The gaze is also shifted when rappers publicly step outside of that inscribed role and to some extent reshape and redefine it. For example, you had Jay-Z, the CEO of Def Jam, a major recording company, Master P, who had a public relations firm, 50 Cent negotiating with Steve Jobs of Apple Computer to produce a G-Unit, computer for sale and distribution to inner cities. Even Ice Cube has produced a reality-based TV show where white families and black families exchange places to examine racial attitudes. Finally, resistance can be found on the very site of production, the record album itself, which are filled and squeezed between the other lyrics filled with gangster image and gangster raps and gangster lyrics. For example, gangster rapper Jada Kiss's song, Why, suggests that Bush knew more about 9/11 than what he admitted to. Jay-Z's song, Moments of Clarity, again squeezed on his album in between tracks filled with hardcore gangster lyrics, suggests that he knowingly adopted the gangster image to sell records and gain financial stability with the intention of helping the urban poor in the end. Part of the problem is that these lyrics with messages subverting the gangster image do not get radio airplay. With corporate conglomeration of the nation's radio airwaves, facilitated by the Telecommunications Act of 1996, alternate voices are rarely heard. As a result, the act has contributed to what has become the de facto voice of hip-hop, gangster rap. Contrary to Habermas's view of the role of law being neutral, law can act both to solidify class hegemonic rule and to stifle counter-hegemonic discourse of marginalized groups. With regard to hip-hop and the law, The Telecommunications Act of 1996 has been anything but neutral in operation. While the political discourse to which I am referencing with regard to hip-hop does not involve recoding popular images that belong to another, it does involve subverting corporate-backed gangster image in rap that predominates the nation's radio airwaves. The passage of the act relaxed local ownership restrictions and eliminated national caps on an entity's ability to purchase radio stations. As a result, immediately following its passage, large corporate conglomerates bought up small and local radio stations. Now a handful of media conglomerates control the majority of the nation's radio airwaves. A key purpose of the act was to deregulate industry to promote more diversity to listeners. However, media conglomeration has in fact resulted in less diversity of sound on the radio. Historically, to promote public interest, convenience, and necessity, the primary focus was on preserving diversity in broadcasts, which translated to placing limits on ownership and to promoting localism and local community interests. The focus was less on economic efficiency or profit for the broadcaster. In the early 1980s, however, there was an ideological shift, which was based largely on supply and demand theory and the view that economic competition and the unregulated operation of the market would cause everything else, like diversity and commitment to localism, to fall in place. The problem with the theory, as it related to the act, however, is that it assumed that all would have access to ownership and to the radio airwaves, and it did not take into account how consumer demand was significantly influenced by radio broadcasts. With this shift, diversity in radio station ownership and content on the radio was lost. After all of the buyouts, localism was no longer the focus, but efficiency and increasing the profit margin was. As a result, local DJs, who were deemed as the gatekeepers to the pulse of the local community, were replaced by cyber jockeying and vocal tracks technology, which permitted a DJ to produce a show with pre-recorded sound bites, listener audiences, claps, national advertisement, that would in turn be sent out to sister stations for radio airplay to sound local. In addition, local directors were replaced by regional managers who were further removed from the local community and headquartered in national and regional corporate offices. Content heard on the radio was significantly scaled down, with the same songs being played repeatedly on the sister stations as well. Radio stations would in turn leverage their position as the gatekeeper to a new artist's career via radio airplay and charge higher advertising costs to the recording companies. Payola and pay-for-play soon followed. As a result, many independent recording labels shut down because they could not afford to pay the high advertising costs to market new talent. As these changes relate to hip-hop, in my article I explore the transformation of a famous local hip-hop station in the Bay Area, KMEL, K-M-E-L-FM, as an example of the way in which the passage of the act has stifled discourse and alternate voices in hip-hop. Prior to the act's passage, KMEL had more of a connection to its local community, with more community radio programming and advertising. Local DJs were featured regularly on the station. They introduced listeners to rappers and diverse hip-hop talent from the local community. Independent record companies experienced phenomenal success marketing local talent over the radio airwaves. After the Telecommunications Act, many local DJs were laid off at KMEL due to cyber jockeying and voice tracking. KMEL and KYLD, the competing station, were bought out by the same company, which consolidated its resources. On a given day, fewer songs or new talent was played on either station. Both stations' playlists were virtually identical. Soon, to increase and maintain advertising revenue, radio stations would focus on the playing of gangster rap to continue to retain a particular listening demographic, white male suburban youth, which did not necessarily reflect the preferences of the local community. As a result, there was less space on the radio to contest the voyeuristic gaze promoted in and through the gangster rap lyrics. The rapper who did not rap about or fit the gangster image did not get played much, which for the most part could make or break his or her record career with sales. As one hip-hop artist stated about hip-hop and the death caused by corporate takeover, you have the one artist saturation thing. The classic time for hip-hop was 94 and 95 when you had 10 different artists running the game. You had Wu-Tang, Nas, Mobb Deep, Biggie, Puffy, Tribe Called Quest. You had mad different flavors because no two artists were the same. There were also a lot more female rappers. Queen Latifah, Yo-Yo, MC Lyte, who took my place, prior to the passage of the act than now, which has led many to conclude that female rappers have suffered the most from the corporate takeover of radio. There has been a few attempts to take back hip-hop, though, despite the tightly corporate-controlled media space, and to increase the diversity and discourse within it. Rap artists are exploring alternative means to reach their listening audiences, like the internet and satellite radio. Others, like the Prometheus Radio Project, are engaged in efforts to establish low-band radio airwaves to expose new talent and alternative voices. Others have sought to expand hip-hop in other media genres, like film. As these examples suggest, artists and others that would contest the corporate-created and heavily marketed gangster image that has come to represent hip-hop continue to pry open space for continued discourse. The problem, however, will again be exposure and visibility, which is necessary to serve as competition to the reach of broadcast radio. While these attempts may be considered small, they are necessary nonetheless to unfreeze the dominant gaze and widen the discursive arena envisioned by Habermas and others. Thank you.
That was very, very informative and very, very provocative. It's fascinating to hear all of you talk. I'm going to, at this point, just try to really briefly summarize what our four panelists said, and then we're going to go into a question and answer session. Professor Ariwa challenged our assumptions about how people create artistically. She critiqued existing copyright law frameworks as a high culture model of creation that profoundly misread the classical music tradition. Much musical innovation, she said, involves a living musical tradition that uses copying as part of the creative process. Specifically, she challenged the law's conception of who has authority to modify existing works. Professor Evans-Walls provided us with an informative primer on copyright law as applied to hip-hop musical composition and performance recording. She asked whether the law had a disparate impact on hip-hop culture and its ability to thrive and grow. And she identified areas of unclarity in the current state of the law. Professor Anderson explored the disconnect between hip-hop artists, the creators, and the copyright owners in the recording industry who are usually not the creators of hip-hop. Using the example of the mixtape as a sorter and categorizer of hip-hop music and the recent criminal prosecution of a mixtape company in Georgia, he argued that if copyright law and copyright holders better understood and internalized the hip-hop artist's perspective, particularly the hip-hop artist's more sophisticated, nuanced, self-policing understanding of copying, then the recording industry would actually enjoy greater benefits. Concluding the panel, Professor Folami answered the question of how did we get to the current state where we have a caricatured, commodified, commercialized version of gangster rap played all over the airwaves, usually the same songs on the same stations. And she had three main points. First, that hip-hop is a part and extension of what Habermas called the public sphere, in this case, the black public sphere. Second, that despite its current monolithic commercialism, hip-hop still has social commentary within it. And third, that the Telecommunications Act of 1996 has stifled black discourse over the nature and future of hip-hop and promoted the stereotyped image of gangster rap as the de facto voice of hip-hop. True localism and artistic diversity was replaced by monolithic efficiency and profit. Now it's time for the question and answer period. I'd like to turn the mic over, please, to Vonda Kirby and Aaron Berry.
I'm Aaron Berry. businessman at the Sports Entertainment Law Society. This is Rob Dixon. He's the Executive Vice President. Really quickly, just want to remind everybody in attendance that Talib and Kweli will be here in the courtroom at 6. And if anyone has any questions,
this is a question for Professor Anderson. This is about the mixtapes. I'm wondering if hip-hop is different with respect to the viral marketing. And the reason I ask is three groups that I associate with the type of viral marketing you're speaking of are Grateful Dead, Fish, and Dave Matthews Band, who all have enjoyed great success through distribution of their live concerts. Two things about them. Number one, they own the copyright in their music, so they can distribute the live concerts without the people who are distributing it getting sued or arrested, which is unfortunate. Number two, they don't enjoy great record sales when compared to those groups who are pushed by the record label juggernauts. So I'm wondering, with respect to mixtapes, number one, why it is that the artists who want to be pushed via mixtapes can't do that, as if they've already given up their copyrights to record companies, and that was unfortunate. Is there a reason for that? And number two, why would we expect great record sales due to mixtapes when other groups who've had that typically made their money through concert performances, not through record sales?
Okay. Thank you for the question. The phenomenon I'm talking about, as you point out, is not unique to hip-hop in terms of there being a way to get the word out about the music that goes beyond kind of traditional marketing. The reason that the reason talking to your first point that the artist that might want to be on a mixtape doesn't always have the freedom to be on the mixtape is because often that artist has assigned his or her copywriting, mostly his nowadays, copyright to the recording company. So that's the phenomenon I was talking about, where you've got a separation between the creator and the owner of the copyright. So typically, the price of getting a record deal, the price of getting what the company traditionally provided, which was recording technology, promotion, and distribution, was that you surrender any claim of the copyright and they own the copyright. So that's the reason why the artist who may want that exposure by being on the mixtape isn't always free with all of their music to get that exposure by the mixtape DJ. And the second question, remind me again the... Well, the record company traditionally, right, and this is changing a little bit as record companies try to enter into what are called 360 deals with artists. But traditionally, the money that was to be made from an artist's music could be divided this way. Sales of physical copies of the music went to the record company, right? That was what you signed over most of that. You got maybe, hopefully, eventually, a few cents in royalties after you had recouped, a few years down the line, but the bulk of the money from your sales went to the record company. So that's how they traditionally made their business. Traditionally, money from performance went to the artist, minus whatever cut the artist owed to promoters and managers and that sort of stuff. So that's been the traditional divide. So the reason that I focus on the impact of the mixtape on record sales is because the plaintiffs or the complainants in these cases are the record companies, and they are claiming that the activity of the mixtape DJ will harm sales because that's traditionally where they've made their money. In my opinion, the activities of the mixtape DJ enhance both sales and performance revenues. But the reason the companies are concerned about sales is because that's where they've traditionally made their money.
Questions? Additional questions?
This is also for Professor Anderson and also about the mixtape question. I was just wondering how you think the hip hop industry's done on that recently. I guess the DJ drama incident's obviously very well known, but since then, how they've done and how do you predict they're going to do in the future, especially given, like, I guess in reference to the last question, obviously, like, Lil Wayne has, you know, he sold so many records this past year, mostly because he became such the most prominent, you know, mixtape rapper. Anyone in the music industry would have to be completely blind to not see that that's a good way to get your artist's name out. You know, you let them become the big mixtape rapper, and then they sell however many million records. So I'm wondering if you had some predictions there.
Well, for a little while, there was a chilling effect of those arrests on the industry. There was some, a lot of it was driven further underground, put it that way. It became much harder for a while, for about a good 6 months after the arrests, to, for example, order a mixtape or download a mix from the internet, because the sites that were doing it just kind of pulled that stuff down, and then they were offering T-shirts instead of music. So for a while it was chilled, and then, you know, it kind of has slowly crept back. Regarding, and I think that you're right, what I claim, I think, is borne out in terms of the way that sales have gone for artists that have a lot of street credibility, because that's what appearing on a mixtape gets you, is street credibility, and ultimately, even if the ultimate consumer is a white suburban guy, street credibility is what makes the sale. And so, you know, Lil Wayne's a great example of that. And then you'd have to be blind not to see it. I think you'd have to be in the position to really truly focus on what's going on as opposed to focusing on other things in order to really appreciate it. Because I think, from my perspective, there's a very clear economic benefit, a very clear brand enhancement benefit to what the mixtape DJs do. Quite frankly, the however many remain, was it 4 or 5 major recording companies that are left? They have almost no brand recognition among people who like hip hop. You don't buy something because it's on Sony Music, right? There was a time when you might buy something because it was on Tommy Boy, right? But all of the old independent hip hop labels are gone. So now what you have are large corporations who, when it comes to hip hop, are pretty faceless. So there is no way for them to say, well, there is something about connecting our brand to that piece of music that will enhance sales. But connecting DJ Drama's brand to that piece of music will. So to me, there's a clear argument from an economic perspective, from a business perspective, from a brand building perspective. And the people that are in the industry, you know, many of them are 10 times smarter than me on the economics of their own industry and on brand building. So it's not always that they, you know, don't see it, but I think they're not allowed to appreciate it because of the environment that they're playing in, right? I think there's something to the corporatization of hip hop, if you will, that plays into this. If you are the head of a publicly traded company in an industry that's going through turmoil, and it's unclear to you whether you're going to be able to protect all the revenues you've enjoyed for the last 5 decades, or that revenue stream, then that may prompt you to, you know, grab a little bit tighter at what you can today, right? You're exploring other ways to make money, but those are not going to make the sort of money for you that the structure of the industry has recently. So you're going to, you know, focus on getting everything you can out of the current structure. So I think that plays into it. I think that it's something somewhat short-sightedness, more short-sightedness than complete ignorance. Because, like I said, they're smarter than me about marketing and about their own businesses. They know where the money is, but they're in trouble, and they're getting what revenue they can. And the current structure, at least of the Copyright Act, which kind of just in a very blanket way says no unauthorized distribution, no unauthorized copying, no unauthorized creation of derivative works, creates an easy out to say, okay, well, we can go get that money, right? We can shut down these mixtape guys, and now you have to buy that single from us. You have to buy it as part of an album, first of all, right? But you've got to get that music from us. So I think it's less it's not complete ignorance, but it's some short-sightedness and some inability to deal with changing economic reality.
Hi. Thank you for this. This is absolutely fabulous, and I feel completely spoiled. I am too from the Bronx and very happy to be here. Okay, so my question has to do with at what point does, or has, I'm not sure how the law speaks to this, but at what point does our popular culture become how do we as a culture become owners of our cultural products, such as music? So for example, I know that in the composition of any given hip-hop piece, you will find that there is an emotional reason. There's a reason why we pull from old music from the past, so much of the jazz. I mean, the 1990s hip-hop movement is full of examples of giving quote-unquote props to the old folk and the music that came before us and the emotionality that brings and the cultural unity that brings to the experience. I'm not sure how the United States deals with this, because I know, for example, Brazil has statutes that say after this much time, this music now becomes popular culture. And this is where my question, it's to the entire panel, and I'm really sorry that Professor Arwell isn't here for this, but I'm curious because at some point, the record companies and those that own the actual copyrights have to let go of that and let us create. And I understand, but I mean, the industry is dying as it's by force. You know, they're strangling it, and this is why we have the single image that we have now on the radio. Where does our law stand on that, and how do you foresee that happening? And that's just one of my questions, so I can take this offline at any time.
Well, I know more about it from a literary property perspective because most of my practice was focused on the publishing industry, that being writing as opposed to music publishing. Although there's certainly connected. And we have one body of law that does apply across the board. Something that I don't know if it's talked about a lot in the music industry. Talked about it a lot. It's starting to become an issue from a literary property perspective, but termination rights and how they may play in. Basically, there are two sections of the Copyright Act that deal with the termination principle. And 35. This is a way oversimplification, but basically after a certain period of time, probably beginning around 35 years after something has been transferred, that the artist or creator has the opportunity to get it back. It's one of those two principles, and it depends on when it happens and whether it's distributed and a lot of other factors and hoops that need to jump through. But it is a savings provision that exists in the Copyright Act that the artist who didn't have the benefit the first time around, benefiting financially from it, if they jump through all the hoops, can have their copyrights returned back to them. And then, in contract to some period of time, if sales diminish, and or will it revert back, and what that language looks like from a contractual perspective. So the ways through contract, but it's, the way it's written in is kind of the kitchen sink mentality of we'll take everything for always and sign here, and we'll let you perform. We're also going to take most of your publishing and all of this and all of that. Because there's one revenue stream or one other significant revenue stream we haven't talked about. Talked about mechanicals and the actual sales of units, and then talked about performance, but also writing is incredibly important. From the postal perspective, if you want to write online, that's where you don't have anything else.
Publishing.
All of your writers and part of the other part of the publishing. So it's a long way around the room to say there is both a technical procedure under the Copyright Act and certain contractual ways to have property returned back, but it can be a long time coming.
And I think the default, the copyright term is a very long term, and it's getting longer. So I think, every time that significant copyrighted works that are owned by companies today are coming close to the end of their copyright, we're going to see another push to extend the term. So until the Disney company feels like it has squeezed all that it can out of Mickey Mouse. It's not getting any shorter. So that's one thing, and I think we're just getting to the point where some of the most important hip-hop works, we will get to the point over the next few years, will hit that 35-year threshold, and we will see the degree to which the artists are cognizant of and able to kind of do everything they need to do to get their rights back. But I think the legal obstacle to it becoming part of the public domain is the length of term under the current statute and the fact that it's still kind of a young genre of music. So we haven't reached the point where the artists or their heirs are able to come back and try to get control over the works again.
Can I ask one more? Okay, so my next question is going to be then, how do you, Professor Anderson, I guess, or anyone, see the role of the government in this? For example, should there be an organization, a clearinghouse that deals with this? Should there be a centralized, I mean, this, and of course getting very idealistic here, and I'm feeling very idealistic nowadays, do you see the government as the servant of the public and the public interest, does the government have a role in being a clearinghouse for this and facilitating this and creating an agency? Who would finance something like this? So for example, like DJs. DJs, as far as I'm concerned, should be licensed. And they should be licensed to do this because the truth is that there is a very traceable and very real economic benefit that they bring to the creator or copyright owner of whatever piece of music they put out there. It's a skill, and you can tell by who gets hired and who does not. So, I mean, is this an organizational issue? Is this issue a problem because we don't have an organization, an agency that's going to clear these things for us, that's going to be the central repository of this information? And I think this is part of not just hip-hop culture, but of all of American culture, musical culture, image culture, all of it. There has to be, I see a void there that maybe this might be able to help. I may be completely wrong and not foreseeing the dangers of having that sort of clearinghouse, but is that a part of a solution? Is that where a solution might be helpful?
I mean, I'm not a copyright scholar, but all of this to me overlaps. And when you bring up the government, I don't know if the Copyright Office, sort of, as I understand it, someone applies for a copyright and it's given. They don't sort of see, where's the diversity? Is this another recording company, or is this an artist, up-and-coming artist? But in terms of influencing or representing public, what the public wants, I definitely see your question play out in mass media, which is my area in particular. So I talk primarily about radio, but it's true also in television and what you see. And so I see two prongs to your question, going back to the one you directed specifically at them, is, how can the mass media better reflect what the public wants or needs, right? How can you take this back, these images, right? And so part of the pushback on the question has been that this does reflect what the public wants, right? When you convert to a market-based supply and demand, I mean, there's someone listening to it, right? There's someone watching, what's that show on BET, I Love New York or something, or this? There's someone watching that, right? So we're giving the consumer what they want, right? You want to hear this song. So part of my critique was, well, which consumer, which demographic are you looking at? So that's part of it. And how big should a broadcaster be held responsible to reflect everyone's needs? So let's say if you two want bluegrass, but the rest of you want rock and roll, and someone over there wants old school hip hop. Why should I be held liable by way of the FCC? So yes, with mass media, there is a governmental body, the FCC, that's supposed to make sure the airwaves or broadcast reflects what the public wants. So the question is, should I as a broadcaster have to cater to niche markets, you two who want bluegrass, if you will, or the few of you who may want old school hip hop, right? Because the masses want something else. And so that's what the intricate question is, which the Obama administration is dealing with in terms of appointing a new FCC chairman. How do you assess what is in the public interest? Is it strictly based on the numbers, the market, the supply and demand? And if it is, I think you have to dig a little deeper to see why people like what they want, right? Is it because you hear the same song? I mean, no disrespect to Soulja Boy, but I don't like that song. I mean, I'm just saying. But by the 1,200th time, I mean, I saw myself.
Okay, I might as well.
Did I really like that song or didn't I like that song? So part of the Obama administration is let's step back away from a market interpretation, a market-based interpretation of what the public interest is, which reflects what the historical approach was to radio and television, right? There was this public trustee obligation on broadcasters. You have to go into the local community and figure out what it is their issue is. What, if they want to hear about the local city ordinance that's coming up, or you don't hear anything about local news, you hear the national stuff that makes it national. You heard about Sean Bell's shooting because it was national news. You didn't hear about the African-American boy shot, 2 weeks ago out in the corner because local news isn't a part of it. And by extension, I say neither is local expression. You only get those artists who are backed by a larger recording label and blah, blah, blah. So part of it, and Obama's administration seems to endorse this, is re-implementing this notion of the broadcaster as a public trustee, and part of that trustee obligation is to connect with your local community. I mean, you had the DJ back in the day, you just don't have it anymore. Now you have the national Wendy Williams, and I'm not critiquing that per se, but I think you need a local outlet to understand what local folks want to hear.
I think there's, just to respond quickly, there's a role potentially for the FCC to play and for our communication statutes to play. There's potentially a role for the Copyright Office to play because they, compared to the Patent Office and the Trademark Office, they don't have enough to do in the Copyright Office. I think there's a role, going back to Professor Orwell's point, in changing the approach and making it less property-based, right, and talking about only going after unfair uses instead of going after every use unless you can prove it's a fair use. My approach is a little bit more individual, or would be a little bit more individual, because I think you truly need to distinguish between those, to use the mixtape DJ example, those mixtape DJs that are adding value, and those, like if I were a mixtape DJ, given my level of skill, I would just be taking the whole song, and then the next song, then the next song. I'm nobody from a mixtape perspective, so I'm not adding any street cred. So you have to look at me differently if I went into that business than you would look at DJ Drama. So I'm more focused on a case-by-case view. And using that view, you could potentially use our fair use law to get at some of those, because a couple of the things that you look at to figure out whether a use is fair is, number one, whether it's a transformative use, and number two, what the impact will be on the market for the copyrighted work. So if in a given case, DJ Drama, we can prove some sort of positive economic impact, or at least not the degree of negative impact that they claim, then he would get the opportunity to claim fair use. If it was me, and I'm not adding anything and just taking sales away, then I wouldn't get the opportunity to use that. So I think there are much larger approaches that would involve the government. My personal approach is more case by case, based on the individual economic contribution that a particular borrower makes to the copyrighted work.
Hi. It seems that the panel has developed a distinction that is left out of the legal context, which is there's an important functional and philosophical difference between the words and the music. It seems like the music is what causes most of the IP problems, the sort of traditional IP problems, and the lyrics, there's better self-policing mechanisms, and there's less of a tendency to just sort of rip off someone else's lyrics because you're quite easily outed for that. And that's obviously it's obviously generalization, but sort of building off that generalization, is there a way for recognizing that distinction to be brought into reforming the intellectual property landscape in a way that can help recognize some of the social and cultural realities of hip-hop as a movement and as a cultural phenomenon? Thank you.
I don't even know how to approach it, but it's the type of thing that I would sit back in my office and go like this for a while to think about it, because I like it. I like the question. I had not thought of it in that way, and didn't initially know where you were going with it, but I can appreciate that about it's the more immediate and negative impact of biting lyrics than the use of sampling the music. Now, we also know that people are sampling, a hook or the chorus or other things as well, so it may be easier to distinguish it theoretically than actually, but I think it is an interesting question.
Yeah, I don't really have an answer to the question. I think it's a good question. I think there's some complexity built in because sometimes the sampling does take some lyrics as well, right? So the sampling or the borrowing does take some lyrics as well. So to use the Two Live Crew version of Pretty Woman, for example, there's a lot of sampling of the music from Roy Orbison's Pretty Woman. Then there's some taking of the lyrical structure as well in making their parody of the Orbison song. So I think when somebody is sampling sounds from someone else's pre-recorded music, sometimes they're pulling some lyrics in too. So I think a distinction that may build on yours that may be interesting is, is the sampling coming from within the community that understands the borrowing, or is it coming from outside, right? Because again, you can sample music in hip hop as well from another hip hop artist, and often it's, not a big deal. Sample some music from Roy Orbison and you will get sued. So I think lyrics and music is an interesting distinction. I haven't thought about it in that way, and so I'm not sure how it plays out, but it's definitely a useful way to think about it.
Questions?
I guess my question stems from Professor Falami's sort of commentary on the monolithic approach to, I guess, the corporate stakeholders and the status quo of, from the radio to the record producers of this sort of gangster mentality in hip hop or, poppy sort of music and other radios. I mean, what solutions do you see that short of what we have today in terms of, the internet and I guess what are your solutions to fight those sort of corporate monopolies that are already out there for sort of emerging artists to spur sort of the creativity that's lacking in the mainstream America?
Thank you for the question. That's kept me up many a night. It's the subject actually of another article I'm working on, and I should say the problem isn't solely related to hip hop. I mean, if you turn to other stations as well, it's sort of a poppy kind of sound, repetitive, same song over and over again. But for me, I think it relates in some ways to the response I gave to you. It's a return to this notion of the broadcasters as the public trustee. And in saying that, so what does that mean? How does that practically play out? The argument I make is that broadcasters should be held responsible to allot a certain amount of time to local talent. I focus primarily on cultural expression and music in particular. There are other media scholars who promote that you should have more local public affairs, news, blah, blah. I promote that as well, but left out of that argument is also a space for musicians and cultural expression. And in the African American community in particular, that's where a lot of coded stuff is, like subversion and stuff. So I sort of argue for this notion, given a allotted amount of time, broadcasters, 6 to 9, whatever it is, has to be devoted to open mic, to local local artists. Now, the response to that is going to be a broadcaster is going to say, well, that violates my First Amendment rights. One. And two, why should I have to do that? Because that's probably going to mean less advertising time. And is that fair to me as a corporation? And so my response to that response is, well, there are other requirements on broadcasters based on what the FCC deems as valuable, right? Let's say if we talk about television. Saturday morning is dedicated, for the most part, to children's television, right? Because the FCC has deemed that as something that's necessary for informing citizens, right? Keeping us informed. If you ever turn the radio on at like 4 in the morning, you're liable to hear Reverend Johnny whoever, right? Religious programming. It's on 3:30 in the morning. So there are certain aspects that the FCC has determined or ascertained as something that's fundamental and key to informing us in our discourse and blah, blah, blah. And I say included in that should also be local expression. Therefore, give the time. I mean, many radio stations conceded to as much when Elliot Spitzer sued them for payola, for engaging in payola. They conceded, all right, we'll give a couple of hours to local access and local space. Now, I guess I don't know. I was going to say, what if you give, this is me thinking out loud, so what if you give that space, that 6 to 9, and you have, and this is where I kind of get stuck in my own argument. So let's say if we give that 6 to 9 whoever wants to come do your thing, come do your thing. Now, what if the artists come sing the same song, that same Soulja Boy song, right? You know, and I kind of think that through, because it is so much a part of what you hear. You begin to think you really like that, so everyone's going to replicate that. But my gut reaction to that is, and I'm making an assumption here, that you will find some Talib Kweli, because there's someone, you have something to say about the brother or sister who was shot in the street the other night. You have you'll capture that as well. Just give that space. And in saying that, you're not asking the FCC to step in and subjectively predetermine what's valued speech and what's valued expression and what's not. You're just opening up the space for folks to be able to express it, be it bluegrass, hip hop, whatever it is.
Well, on behalf of West Virginia University College of Law, we'd like to thank you all for being here, and we would also like to present you with some gifts. We're going to adjourn for, yeah, I did. We're going to adjourn for just a little while, and Talib Kweli will be back in here at 6 o'clock.
Good evening. I'm Professor Andre Douglas Pond Cummings of the West Virginia University College of Law, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome each of you to our symposium this evening, The Evolution of Street Knowledge, Hip-Hop's Influence on Law and Culture. The West Virginia University College of Law proudly presents what we believe is a progressive exploration of the impact and influence hip-hop has had on the law as well as on global culture. In order to bring this exploration to you, we've put together 4 extraordinary panels where individuals discuss this impact on law and culture, and we've brought 2 keynote speakers together that we're very excited to present to you this evening. Tonight, hip-hop artist and activist Talib Kweli will speak to us in connection with this idea that hip-hop truly has a lasting impact and an important influence on law and culture. Before we get started, there's a few parties that I need to recognize and a few people that I need to thank before we bring Talib Kweli to you. First of all, it's the West Virginia University College of Law and the Sports and Entertainment Law Society that have put this event together. The great support of Dean Joyce McConnell and the College of Law, together with the West Virginia University's Center for Black Culture and Research, initially conceptualized this project and put the funding together to bring this to you. With the Festival of Ideas tomorrow, Dr. Cornel West will speak to us in the Mountain Lair Ballrooms at 4 p.m. on the same subject, bookending what we think is a very important public intellectual, Cornel West, with probably one of the most important hip-hop voices of our generation now, Talib Kweli. I also want to thank the West Virginia University Black Law Student Association, the American Constitution Society. Both organizations offered tremendous help from both local and national perspective. I want to also pay respects to the West Virginia University Office for Social Justice, who has provided great support for this event as well. Other sponsors include Walters Kluwer's Aspen Publishers, Westlaw, LexisNexis, and several other student organizations, the Outlaw Student Organization, and the West Virginia University Student Bar Association, as well as the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity. As you can see, a lot of people worked very hard to put all of this together and provide this opportunity. At this time, I'd like to ask the following students to stand. Bethany Swatton, Robert Dixon, Brian Welch, Sean Fluharty, Sheila Hassani, Andrew Mitchell, Aaron Berry. You can see they all have prime seats. J.J. Voigthofer, Kim Matras, Kim Murphy, Arthur Bryan, Vonda Kirby, Chris Williamson, and Jeff Gustafson. If you'll all turn around and look at the crowd, and if you'll all recognize the students that put this together for you. Without that crew, this would have never seen the light of day. And these students have given liberally, believe me, of their time and talents. Also, I would like to add a special thanks to some of the individuals here that have made this event possible. Margaret Obush, who has coordinated our event, Brian Caudill, who's in charge of all of our communications and publicity, Alan Lighthizer, who helps Brian in that effort, Louis Mackley and Keith Walton, who are web streaming this live, provide all of our audiovisual assistants. Mary West and Barb Mishniak are budget officers, and again, Dean Joyce McConnell. Okay, so I'm sitting in my office a year ago, and one of my favorite students walks into my office and says, "Professor Cummings, I have an idea. Don't you think hip-hop has transformed the way that we interact with the law? And don't you think it's had a global imprint on society?" And I said, "Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, I have this article I've been writing for 10 years about the way hip-hop is changing lawyers and the way lawyers practice the law." And he said, "So why don't we do a symposium?" And I said, "You don't want to do a symposium. It is so much work. You have to work so hard and bring all these people together." And this student convinced me that we needed to put this thing together. And that group of students conceptualized the panels, and our number one choices for our keynotes were Cornel West and Talib Kweli. And they're here. And so I'd like to bring you that student, Brian Welch, who will formally introduce our keynote speaker tonight, Talib Kweli.
Good evening. First, I'd like to extend the warmest welcome to all of the students, faculty, distinguished guests, and fans of hip-hop that have gathered here tonight at the West Virginia University College of Law. As you all know, we are here to celebrate and discuss the impact that hip-hop music is having on our laws, culture, and overall outlook on society. And just in case you couldn't tell from the number of people that are here in the courtroom tonight, we just happen to have one of the most popular and successful hip-hop artists on the planet here to lead the discussion. But for those of you that don't know, please allow me a few words about tonight's keynote speaker, Talib Kweli. A native of Brooklyn, New York, Talib Kweli spent his formative years performing in New York City and Cincinnati, Ohio, where he established his reputation as a unique talent. In 1998, his ascension as a hip-hop heavyweight began when he teamed with fellow Brooklyn native Mos Def to form Black Star. The duo's only album, which featured socially conscious lyrics and high-quality production, achieved critical acclaim and launched successful careers for both artists. Kweli went on to collaborate with the album's producer, High Tech, in releasing a second album, Reflection Eternal, which was also well received by critics. However, it was his fourth album, entitled Quality, which established Kweli as a mainstream and commercial success. Released in 2002, Quality sold more than 500,000 copies to give Kweli a certified gold album. It included the smash hit single Get By, which utilized memorable lyrics and the signature Kanye West beat to blow up the airwaves well into 2003. Quickly hailed as a classic album by fans of hip-hop, Quality was followed by a number of successful ventures for Kweli, including his latest release, Eardrum, which debuted as the #2 album on the Billboard charts upon its release in 2007. In addition to collaborating with artists such as Kanye West, Common, Mary J. Blige, John Legend, will.i.am, and Justin Timberlake, Kweli made multiple appearances on Dave Chappelle's show and has appeared in television commercials for the Big Ten Network. He also teamed with Mos Def to purchase Nkiru Books, formerly the oldest African-American bookstore in Brooklyn, and converted into the Nkiru Center for Education and Culture. This nonprofit center promoted literacy with a special emphasis on the contributions of African Americans to literature, history, music, art, and the sciences. However, it is for his ability to address complex issues through his music that Talib Kweli remains most well known. Prominent hip-hop artist Jay-Z, lamenting the necessity of dumbing down lyrics to sell records, once rhymed, "If skills sold, truth be told, I'd probably be, lyrically, Talib Kweli." Still, clever lyrics alone have not elevated Talib Kweli to his current popularity. Even he has acknowledged this, rhyming, "I speak at schools a lot because they say I'm intelligent. No, it's because I'm dope. If I was whack, I'd be irrelevant." Well, regardless of whether it's because he's intelligent or because he's just plain dope, we're sure proud to have him here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Talib Kweli.
First, want to say thank you to everybody for spending a beautiful Saturday night here with me. I'm sure that y'all could do. Oh no, it's Thursday night, right? It's Thursday. A Thursday night. 30 Rock is coming on tonight. You know what I'm saying? It feels like the weekend to me because I just came from Los Angeles. I was out there for a while, and my weekend was kind of extended. I was out there celebrating. There was a lot of parties going on, and I was celebrating the release of a good friend of mine, John Forte. He just got released out of prison, and we were just having a good time out there. But so still like the weekend to me. Forgive me, you know. But I am extremely humbled that y'all chose to have me for this discussion, and that you invited me down here. And I look forward to this dialogue and this conversation. And you're going to see from the way that I speak that my style is going to be real conversational. I wrote some things that I want to share with y'all, and I'm going to talk for a minute, but then I really, really look forward to the question and answer. That, to me, is the heart of what I do when I come to speak to y'all. So first off, I was in the hotel room for a second when I got here. I landed about 3 o'clock, and I was watching Colin Powell did an interview with Don Lemon on CNN, and I don't know when the interview took place, but what was interesting to me was Colin Powell talked about how much he loved Barack Obama and how this moment was having such an impact on him that every day when he woke up, he'd just be like, wow, he just really felt it. And he told a story about being younger. He grew up in the Bronx, and how they found out when he was a little kid that they were going to have a black bus driver in the South, and how that was amazing to them as little kids. Like, wow, we can have a black bus driver. And the first thing they thought was, he better not crash. That's the first thing they thought, you know? And he said just in his lifetime to go from having that low self-esteem and feeling that inferior to where you feel like, wow, you have a black bus driver, to having a black president, you know, it made him cry, you know, to see him crying, to see Jesse Jackson on TV crying. These is grown-ass men, you know. You know, they seen a lot of stuff, you know. Jesse's seen a lot of stuff. Colin Powell, he fought, and he's seen a lot of stuff. So, but it's interesting because it made me think about, well, first interesting thing about it was it made me think about Colin Powell was probably just like, man, I was in the Bush administration and I got off scot-free. Like, I'm good. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the first thing when, you know, he seemed a little settled and real happy about that. But it made me think about my conversion to being a supporter of somebody like Barack Obama and how it happened through hip-hop. You know, I'm somebody who has not voted. When I came of age to vote, I voted for Bill Clinton for president. And, oh, thank you. And it's not that I didn't like Bill Clinton as a president. I just saw how that office was disrespected with the Ken Starr stuff and everything. And say what you want to say about what he did, and he lied and everything. Like, he did that, definitely. He did that. But just what the political process became to deal with that situation, it just was real kind of disgusting to me, and I just couldn't believe that I participated in it. It was something that I didn't want to participate in. I did, and I said, you know what? He got elected president, but it seemed like there was so much stuff thrown at him and so many obstacles, and it was such like it just was a real turnoff to me, just what it became degraded to. And so I was done, and I was kind of like the poster boy for that. Like, I was able to articulate my views very clearly about why I didn't vote, and how, I was like, okay, if I'm not going to vote, I'm not going to complain about politics. I'm going to talk about social conditions because that's something I feel like I can change. I feel like in my community, with my music, that's something I can put my hands on. And so that's what I started focusing on. And here comes Barack Obama, and first is my mom, who's just like, she like a gangbanger for Democrats. Like, she just lifelong, like, she's riding, and it don't even matter if they right, they wrong, she just riding, and I couldn't really roll with that. I'm like, yeah, I know he's black, I get it, he's dope, he can speak well, and then my brother, my younger brother, who's actually a lawyer, and he started campaigning, like going out on campaign trails and going out and knocking on doors and stuff like that. And, my brother, for him to get that involved, it made me take a second look at what this dude's doing. And then my children, the effect that this black man running for president had on my children was really important to me. And I started to see from what he was doing that, okay, with the right amount of energy and time, and this is somebody who maybe could have a shot at this. I never saw in my lifetime anybody who had a shot at becoming president, because I separate politics from presidential and like government politics. It's different from like school board elections and stuff in your community. But on that level of presidential politics, I never saw anybody who I could relate to. Wow. Who actually, to be real and to be frank, had a shot. The closest was Al Sharpton, and that says a lot, like when Al Sharpton was running for president, I'm like, some things he said, I was like, I agree with that. But then and then there's other things I was like, oh man, like he's never gonna win, But all those things started to happen, and I started to think about it, and then I got a call from his office, and it came into my office, but that was impressive to me because I've actively been out there like, not actively, but if they ever ask me, I'd be like, I don't vote. And Rock the Vote would come and try to get me to do concerts, and I'm like, I don't believe in the lesser of two evils. I'm not going to just tell people to vote blindly. People don't know what they're voting for. They don't know what these things represent. They don't know about the Electoral College, and they don't know how, but there's a lot of just information that people are not utilizing when they're being told to just go out and vote. And if you're voting and you don't know what you're voting for, that's counter-revolutionary. That's just as bad as, voting for the wrong party, I think. But all these things started to happen, and when I got the call from the campaign, it was like, okay, now Barack Obama is starting to knock down all the things that I thought would never happen. I thought the politicians, would never pay attention to what we are talking about in the hip hop community. In my lifetime, I hadn't seen it. I worked with Russell Simmons on his hip hop summits. I did a hip hop summit at All-Star Weekend in Houston a few years back. And it was good because it was All-Star Weekend, so all the artists and celebrities were in town, so they could all come to the hip hop summit. And the thing I noticed was all the senators and all the politicians were there, and they were in the back, and no one knew who they were. They were representing their districts, but they knew that the kids knew the artists. So the artists would come up, and the kids would cheer for the artists, and then they would introduce a senator or somebody, and they would come up, and no one knew who they were, and they didn't know who the kids were, and they didn't know who the artists were. And the first thing they would do was thank Coca-Cola or something. Like, that was the first thing they would do. Like it was crazy. Like, let me thank GE for flying me down here. Let me thank Coca-Cola, and let me thank, and I like Coca-Cola, and I use GE products, but that ain't the time or place for that. And that's how deep and wide the disconnect to me was. It's like it didn't even make no sense. But yeah, so I started seeing different things, and so I put a blog on my MySpace page supporting Barack Obama, which was big for me because I always been like, I don't support any candidates. And I got on a song with Kids in the Hall, a hip hop group out of Chicago. They had always been very supportive of President Obama's campaign from the beginning, and they seized the opportunity when they saw that I switched up a little bit to holler at me, and they got Bun B from UGK, a seminal rap group out of Houston, Texas, who had never supported a candidate before in his life as well. And me and Bun got on the work to do remix, and you can go on YouTube and check that out. But I started to see that this hip hop, the hip hop being involved in that campaign wasn't just activist rappers at this point. It's like, okay, Bun B's doing it. Okay, now Young Jeezy got, my president is black. And it's like, he's like, okay, I motivate the thugs, but you motivate me. It's like, okay, this is something that's not necessarily intellectual, but it's something that on a base level, people really understand how powerful this moment is. I mean, Young Jeezy, he wearing a snowman t-shirt. He's like, I sell cocaine. That's what I do. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what he talking about. In case y'all don't know, that's what Young Jeezy talking about, selling cocaine, right? So, but he's like, I support Barack Obama, but, don't tell Jeezy I said that. I was on tour with Nas. It was interesting in the summertime. What's interesting is Nas had a problem with Young Jeezy because he had said hip hop is dead. When he came out with the album title Hip Hop is Dead, Young Jeezy spoke up for the rappers of the South. He said hip hop ain't dead, it's in the South. And he said, I take offense to you saying hip hop is dead because your type of hip hop is not what's successful on the radio anymore. And so they had a little thing in the internet and the blogs and everything for a second. But it was nice to see Nas jump on the President is Black song with Young Jeezy. And then Nas was also Nas been on that for a minute. He had a song back in the days, I want to talk to the mayor and the governor and the motherfucking president. I want to talk to the FBI and the CIA. And I forgot the rest of it. But so he was on that. That was Nas' song from 3-4 years ago. And now he had a song like where he sampled Tupac saying, although it's been heaven sent, we ain't ready to see a black president. And he had put a song like that on his album. So he had like 3 songs in a row that he was performing, dedicating to Barack Obama. And then Green Lantern, who was Nas' DJ at the time, put me on a remix of that song with Busta Rhymes and David Banner. And, these are just things that I'm seeing. I'm just seeing the ball in motion. I'm seeing how this single event is really changing what people are talking about. And I've always maintained that the best art, and hip hop is one of the best forms of art, but the best art follows the people, follows the lead of the people. It accurately documents and describes what the people are going through. People sometimes get it misconstrued because they see the power of the images on television or they hear the songs on radio and they think that, these artists have so much power to influence the generation. They do, but the artists are influenced by where they come out of. The art in the 60s wasn't revolutionary because the artists themselves was revolutionaries because, the community was like, James Brown, if you don't cut your conch, we ain't rocking with you this year. You know what I'm saying? That's what it was. The community put that out there. Like, Ray Charles wanted to perform in that spot when he went in Georgia. He wanted to go. And the community was like, nah, Ray, we ain't rolling with you. And he had to change the way that he saw things. And that's what created this revolutionary art. So it's not really, it's up to the artists. It's up to everybody because everybody has a responsibility as a human being. But it's up to the teachers and the students and lawyers and the activists and people on the street. It's up to those people to inspire artists so that they can make inspirational music. I did a Rock the Vote show with Solange Knowles, who has a great CD out. If y'all don't have Solange CD, go get that. But it was a Rock the Vote show, and the Rock the Vote people got mad at me because they finally got me to perform at the Rock the Vote show, And I'm like, yeah, I could perform. And the reason I was going to perform is because I felt like that audience was going to go vote for Barack Obama. So I'm like, okay, I can influence that audience, right? And the first thing I said was, when I said, we're up here for Rock the Vote, but I'm here to tell you that I'm here supporting Obama. And I'm not down with the whole vote for whoever. That's not me. That's not why I'm here. That's not it at all. But that's the beauty of what I can do, is that they can be Rock the Vote and they can do that. And hip hop. What it is the last folk music. It's music that speaks to the people on the street in the language that they still using it and they still speaking it. And so I could be that dude who could say what people are thinking. Because when I said that, a lot of people know, it's like, yeah, that's why I'm here. I could say that, and that could be my job to say that, to say what people are really feeling, while somebody else can organize stuff. But to just bring it full circle, the thing that really impressed me about Barack Obama was his community organizing, which in my mind is a form of activism. Doesn't necessarily make him a revolutionary. I think, if you want to be a revolutionary, you have to believe you want to tear the whole thing down and start over. I don't think that's what Barack Obama is doing, but I think that his background in community organizing and activism is what has propelled him to these heights, and what is the thing that makes me and people like me, I think, able to relate to him. Not everybody in the activist community is rolling with him like that. But some people, some people are so pushed for change so much that they forget that they have to be agents of change. You can't just expect your opposition to change. Change is God. You change constantly all the time. If you're just expecting your opposition to change and you never change with the times, then you just as blockheaded or just as stubborn or pigheaded as your opposition. First thing you have to start with, I think, is you learn in the home first. It starts with your parents. You take care of your own. You take care of your family. Then you learn about the block you live on. You're proud of your block. You're proud of where you're from. You go to your community. You become, like, just by your nature, an activist in your community, and then you become a citizen of the world when you travel more. And what you do is you take those lessons that you learn in the house, on your block, in your community, into the world. And that's something that I think hip-hop has helped me to do. Hip-hop has allowed me to travel the world and take these lessons I learned from my community and apply them wherever. Now, I grew up in a nationalistic sort of household where it's like, we are black people who live in America, and we have an example to set and an obligation to Africans all over the diaspora. We have access to resources that Africans all over the world don't have. And now those ideas, as I grow older, are challenged. Some people have suggested a challenge because we have a black president. I had somebody write on my website, my fan website, now that we have a black president, what are you and people like Mos Def and people, what are y'all going to talk about? And it was a serious question from us. Like, it wasn't a joke. They wasn't trying to make me laugh. Like, I have fans who really think like that, and then of course you questions like, well, do we live in a post-racial society? Racism in this country is the biggest cause of all our problems that we have in this country, because it's built on slavery. This country is built on the backs of black people in chains, and that's something that we can't escape from. But I don't know if racism is the single biggest obstacle that we have nowadays because of my experiences with hip hop. I think the obstacle might be not having the information. I mean, not knowing how to use, or not being provided the resources, which you can say is a cause of racism. But I think you have to go out and get those resources. And when I say that, I'm not talking about people. I'm not talking about us as a group of people. I'm not talking about activists or black people, because there are people in the world who are still very poor and who can't get anything no matter how hard they try. But I'm talking about activists, students, teachers, people who do have access to these resources, and how we don't utilize them. That's what I'm really speaking on, and how we create these new obstacles for ourselves. I think that one thing that I've always been able to take with me into anything that I've gotten from hip hop is self-reliance and like business acumen and confidence. Those lessons are things that I've been able to apply to all aspects of my life. Having to grow and change as an artist has forced me to deal with technology in ways that I've never had to deal with it before. When I first started in the game, the worst thing that could happen is your song get leaked on the internet. Now it's the best thing that can happen, provided it's a good song. Me harnessing this is gonna bring it back to my community. It's gonna provide the infrastructure that my community needs for me going out and getting and bringing back. That in other communities besides my own, the dollar bill goes around and touches everybody's hand a few times. Some communities 30 times before it leaves that community. In my community, it might touch 1 or 2 hands before it goes to somebody else's community. And that's not to say we shouldn't be doing business. We should be doing business to everybody. But proud black people should be doing business with proud Irish people, should be doing business with proud Jews, and that's how you develop a mutual respect and understanding. So my examples in hip hop are not like the examples that you get caught into watching on TV, the bling bling, the rims, the chains. Like, progressive people get caught up in those images the same way, quote unquote, supposed ignorant people get caught up in them images. We look at those images and we say, oh man, why are they playing that stuff on the radio? Why are they not playing more Most Def on the radio? And who cares what they playing on the radio? Most Def is an artist who's going to sell records and go on tour for the rest of his days, whether he has a song on the radio or not. You can't say this about these other people. So those images are not, it's seductive, but those images are not what represents hip hop. What represents hip hop is all of you guys. What represents hip hop is this room right here. The illest DJ in hip hop right now on the internet is Mick Boogie. He's a white dude from Cleveland. He's not the illest DJ because he was cutting and scratching the illest and at all the parties and at Latin quarters and carry crates, and he's a marketing major. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's why he's the illest DJ, because he knows how to get himself out there. Red Cafe, a rapper from New York City. He got a song called I'm the Hottest in the Hood right now. And it's a hot song. He raps, the swag is dope, and he's got the chains and this and that and that and this. You look at him, you're like, man, he must have sold a lot of drugs, And that's how he carries himself. But no, he sold a lot of cribs and houses. He's a real estate agent, like, that's his thing, And so those are dope. That to me is hip hop. Like the working class hip hop. Like the way it affects your whole life. It's not just like, oh, the images we see of rappers or whatever. And that just doesn't go for hip hop. It goes for school. It goes for activism. A man mentioned Nkiru Books. Part of the problem with Nkiru Books and why it's not around is because you had a whole bunch of people who cared about having a bookstore in the community. We had all these meetings and we wrote for grants and try to do fundraisers and poetry readings for fundraisers. But we never had any accountants in the meetings and never had any bankers in the meetings or anybody who knew anything about money, really, other than, how to spend it, And never had any lawyers really in the meetings, And so going back to what I was saying about, Barack Obama, whether he's a revolutionary or not, like the idea that we're going to take this system and flip it on its head is something that, in some ways is very attractive, But the more realistic idea is that you need to have people who have revolutionary thoughts across the board, and you need to find out what it is about somebody that you relate to. What do you have in common? And you build on the things that you have in common. And when you have that, you can have revolutionary policemen and lawyers and teachers and garbage men and doctors and rappers and students and poets and whatever. And the language of hip hop and the energy of hip hop and the confidence and the self-reliance and the business acumen, these are things that can help with this. And it makes it, people like Red Cafe, people like Big Boogie, people like Ninth Wonder, who is an incredible producer but also teaches a class on hip hop in North Carolina. People like that, to me, are the examples of the future of hip hop and how it's revolutionary practice, not just rhetoric. To give you one more example of the power of it, like 2 years ago, no, it was more than 2 years ago because it was it's like 3 years ago. I had to catch a plane. I was working on the Eardrum album, and I was trying to find quotes to put on the top of the album, and I was listening to old records by Stokely Carmichael, who I think it's Kwame Ture he became, right? Kwame Ture? Yeah, he was talking in a stadium full of people, and he was just mad, and he was talking about Black Power, and he was crack of this and crack of that, right? And I'm listening to this. It's from 1961, and I called JetBlue to make a reservation. I was like, oh, I gotta make my flight, book my flight. I booked my flight for the next day. Got to the airport, stuck my credit card in, and turned around, and my credit card didn't work. Went to the gate. They said, "Oh, well, you have a problem. You have to go walk with these guys." I turned around, and it's like the Men in Black is behind me, all right? Like 4 dudes in black suits, and they're like, "Okay, sir, you gotta come with me." And they take me in the back room, and they're like, "Okay, we got a dude from the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, the TSA here, right? And we want to know what you was listening to yesterday when you made your reservation." I said, well, what are you talking about? How you know what I was listening to? And they said, well, they said the whoever you were speaking to felt like they heard something threatening in the background while you making your flight reservation. All right, so I was like, okay, now these guys, they showed me a list of people, names and stuff, and all the names were blacked out except for like 3 people, which was at the time it was my girlfriend, my manager, and another artist, I think. And it was like, you know them? I was like, yeah, I think it was. And that was it. They were real nice and everything, and they held a plane for me and everything. But what I learned from that experience, they just wanted to make sure. They said, yeah, we knew you were artists, and we figured it was some artist thing or whatever, but we just had to, we had to do our due diligence and check it out. And it just made me realize, I was like, wow, it's like people get caught up in those images, those gangstified images of hip hop that are not threatening. They're not dangerous. They're as powerful they have as much power as you give them, and here you have Stokely Carmichael making a speech from 40 years ago that got them tailing me because I'm listening to the speech, and it's ideas like that are a lot more dangerous than these images that we get caught up in talking about. I go to schools a lot and speak about it a lot, and I find myself defending hip hop a lot, and I also find myself on the receiving end of a lot of love from people like yourself who love hip hop. But the only last thing I can say is just don't get caught up in what they want you to believe about how powerful these images are. The reason why I can still do this. I don't have a hit record on the radio at all, but I'm still relevant, and y'all still want to hear from me because of the work that I put in. So with that said, once again, I'm extremely humbled and honored to be here in front of y'all, and I look forward to answering whatever questions and participating in a discussion. Thank you.
We good? All right. Okay. So my question is, you mentioned the political discourse going on in hip-hop now and how it has kind of evolved to where everybody's got a political record. I mean, Rhymefest has a record, Saigon has a record out that actually is getting some play, and it seems like every rapper wants to do it. Do you think this will have staying power in hip-hop? And also, do you think it'll kind of evolve to where the bubblegum, watered-down hip-hop, which we've seen for the past few years as like the mainstream, and whereas artists like yourself and Mos Def and the Rhymefest of the world kind of do not get the mainstream appeal, will that now garner you more success? Because if there is staying power in this political discourse, will you benefit from it?
I will say that, and when there's a situation like when the times are changing like now, and you have the recession and people thinking more about saving money instead of spending money and stuff like that, that artists that are considered to be more message oriented or get a lot more play. I would definitely say that. But I mean, I think the beauty of it is that because of the path I've tried to take musically, I'm still able to do shows no matter what. And I think that, as far as like I was saying, the art is going to follow the times. I mean, like an artist like Jeezy, he had Nas on the President's Black record, and then Jay-Z jumped on the President's Black record, and it gave the record more weight. And it's like, it's a cute record. Hey, my president is black. It's cute. But when you add what Nas and Jay, who not because they're from New York, but just because they're from an era where the lyrics were way more important, when you add their presence to the record, it just gives it more weight. And it is a moment that that unifies everything, that connects everything. You know, like there's nothing more pop than the Obama girl. That was an incredibly pop moment. You seen Obama on the cover of Vanity Fair. He looked like Derek Zoolander, looking like that's Magnum. You know, I mean, ain't nothing more pop than that. You know, it's like, so I think it's like Jay-Z said on the remix. He said, I was hot before Barack, so imagine what I'm gonna do now, and that's how I feel too.
If you raise your hand, I'll get it around to you. I believe our first question's right here.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for being here. I'm so excited. But I'm a professor, and I teach at Howard now, and I'll be fortunate enough to teach at West Virginia. And I look at myself primarily as a teacher. And you mentioned earlier that you feel that one of the biggest obstacles today is teachers have the resources, but they don't utilize them, and you find that there are obstacles. Can you give us some sort of specific examples of obstacles and how I can get around that? Because I really don't want to be a part of the problem. I want to be a part of the solution. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, what I was trying to say with that is connecting the idea of sort of the grassroots approach to the idea that hip hop is still a folk music, and in dealing with it, you have to have a grassroots approach to dealing with it. You have to sort of participate in hip hop if you're going to talk about it, or else no one wants to listen to you. And connecting that to Obama's grassroots approach. I'm just now learning because I want to stay in business and I want to increase my brand, how to use the internet. And I feel like I'm on the cutting edge of a lot of things. But I'm like, okay, I'm on the cutting edge of a lot of things, and I've been checking my email and going on MySpace for a couple of years, But I mean, about really utilizing it and drawing traffic, like creating my own website and drawing traffic to it, and just that type of stuff. That's really where my head is at now. And I guess what you hear from me is, I can't say what resources teachers are not using, but I know what resources I haven't been using as someone who's not just a hip hop artist, but a hip hop artist who's considered to be the voice of the community, or the voice of activism. So it's like, okay, when we had the Nkiru, we had those people around us, but we weren't utilizing them. Now we have the internet. There's no excuse for not connecting with those people. Back then, when I was working at Nkiru, maybe 10 years ago, it was a real issue of like, okay, well, people had to get off work, and can you make it to the meeting? And if you're going to be on the board of directors, can you really be here for the meeting? And now we can Skype, like there's a lot of things that have changed that I think that we can utilize.
Questions on this side?
Hi, I just had a question about, you mentioned sort of the commodification of the gangster image, if you will. And I wonder, do you have any concerns or any thoughts about, as the community is moving towards becoming more responsive to positive hip-hop, if you will, if I give it the classification, is there a fear or a thought at all that the positive message will become commercialized as well, sort of like if you remember when like identifying with Africa was the in thing, like McDonald's had a kente cloth cup or plastic cup or kind of thing like that.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts or any ideas about, now that positive hip-hop, if you will, is getting more airplay, or the message is getting out there, it too may become commercialized and lose its authenticity with the people?
Yeah, I mean, I think, gangster rap, NWA was a response and a reaction to images like Public Enemy and De La Soul. And those things were commodified to a certain degree, to where you had a few good groups. You had KRS-One, you had X-Clan, you had Public Enemy, but then you had a lot of people who just had African names or Muslim-sounding names that just was whack, and just like, you had a lot of like conscious rappers who was eating pork and, just a lot of that type of stuff. And so, that's what NWA came out of, and that's just the nature of art. Art is not supposed to be, art by definition doesn't have to be responsible. It can be, and when it is, it's beautiful. But some of the best art in the world is irresponsible. So I don't put that on hip hop. I put that on people like myself who know better. The difference between me and somebody like a 50 Cent is, my parents are college professors, and 50 Cent, his mother got shot when he was 12, and she was selling crack. And our music, the music we made, has reflected that. So I wouldn't want to stop his expression, or I wouldn't want to not have that in hip hop. I just want to see more of a balance. The problem is not that those things are not being created, but some of the gangster stuff is a lot more sexy and easier to sell on the surface level. So that's the country we live in. It's like and I recognize that, but it's our job as people who know better to not get caught up in that and to be able to see past that and say okay, well, that may be with the whole country, but we have to understand that that's not what represents hip hop. And I'm talking about image wise, because 50 Cent loves hip hop music. That's why he makes it. He's one of the me and him use the same producers. DJ High Tech produced for 50 Cent too. So as a lot, we have a lot more in common than the differences. And when I get in settings like this, I try to stress what we have in common.
All right, I think we have one right over here. Behind you.
Hi. I just want to say, for one, I love you. I've been listening to you since Black Star. My dad introduced me to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, I understand the importance of gangster rap and of message orientated hip hop. Do you think now that message orientated hip hop is becoming more popular and is getting on the rise because of the election, that the attack on hip hop will stop?
It's interesting. This is like the fourth time that somebody has said that message hip hop is becoming more popular. Y'all really feel like that? For real? I'm just asking. I'm just curious because I'm hearing that. That's not something I hear that often. That's why I'm asking. But I'm hearing it from y'all. Just conscious hip hop. Because like, you said that. 3 years ago. I think that, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I mean, I think what you have when it comes to your question, you have a generation that sees through it. In politics, you had a generation that saw through sort of the tricks of the Republican Party. Some of those tricks that they pulled this year would have worked 3-4 years ago, I think. But now you have a newer generation that was like, oh, that's hogwash. I don't believe you. All right? And so you had the same thing in hip-hop. I think Kanye West is an artist with a lot to do with that. He's had an incredible influence on hip-hop and hip-hop artists, because the whole gangster thing, there was a time when like street credibility was a realistic thing. Like where artists were like, oh man, I don't listen to him because he don't got enough street credibility. Like, really? But now it's a little different. Like I hear a record like a Kid Cudi record, right? Which is Day and Night, which I don't even know where Kid Cudi's from. He's from Cleveland? All right. His records sound good. The record, it does not sound like a hip hop beat. The way he dresses is not like your average everyday hip hop fan on the street. He dresses more like a downtown sort of hipster type of dude, What he's talking about is a stoner record. He's talking about smoking weed in the record, but it's a little bit more poetic and esoteric than just like, yeah, I smoke every day. It's a little bit more introspective. It's a little bit more sensitive of a record, And you hear this record on the radio, and then Jim Jones, jumps on the remix, and it's like this generation, I think, is their ideas of hip hop and ideas of street credibility, and those images are starting to melt away and fade away. And I think it's because they're just following what's happening in the streets. Is someone coming off all hard and gangster, like the term real gangsters move in silence, I think is starting to be applied a little bit more, where it's like all that posturing and posing is it used to work before it got on TV, and now we see it on TV. And I saw an episode of Flight of the Conchords last week, right, which is like my favorite show, right? And Brett had wrote a rap, dissing all the rappers. He said, Mos Def is not very good. Missy Elliott is not very good. Snoop Dogg is not very good. So then he wrote this rap, and then he was scared that all the rappers was going to come kill him, right? That's what happened, right? And so he forms a gang, right? He gets the people in his building, his neighborhood, to form a gang and stuff. And his man is talking, his man Dave, one of his best friends, is talking to him. And he's like, well, who'd you make up? He's like, well, it depends on who you diss. Who'd you diss? He's like, oh man, I dissed Snoop Dogg. He's like, you dissed Snoop Dogg? He's like, man, he was the horse in racing stripes. You don't want to mess with that dude, man. So it's like it's to the point where the images is just, we see through it at this point. You know what I'm saying? It's entertainment. Like with the 50 Cent Rick Ross thing, or with Rick Ross, people found out Rick Ross used to be a corrections officer. And I was like, oh my God, how could he be gangster Rick Ross who I know the real Noriega and you a CO? How could that be? Right? And then it's like Rick Ross said, nah, I was never a CO, those was lies, fake pictures. Then he came out and said, nah, I used to be a CO, I was lying the whole time, right? But no one cared. 5 years ago, imagine 50 Cent came out and was like, you found out he used to be a cop, right? It would have smashed his career. But I think at this point, people just realize, look, if you really thought Rick Ross was a real drug dealer that really knew Noriega, then that's your fault. You know what I'm saying? Like we see through it at this point. You know?
We have a question down here.
My question is, there's been political rap ever since rap started. It's more of an extreme point of view. Deb Prez says it's not the White House, it's a crack house. There's NWA and Public Enemy. But my question is why are the political views of, they say, conscious rappers like yourself, like a Nas, like a Common, why are their political views getting more credence as opposed to, the people who came before them? And I know I still listen to that. Dead Prez is one of my faves. But, why are their political views not necessarily being pushed aside, but not given as much of the same, I guess, consideration as
like who are you saying? Like
Public Enemy. NWA, you said they were a response to a movement, but everybody's had political views. KRS-One, and they've all voiced them in songs. And I know most of them came out before I was born. I know that, but they still had valid political views. And why I'm trying to say, why are the conscientious rappers like Kanye, like yourself, getting more credence to what you guys are saying now?
I just think that's just a matter of age. You know what I'm saying? Like, some of those dudes is old. They don't want to leave their crib, Like, I'm still, I'm in my prime. I get around, I think that's, I think that's all that is, as far as, Ice Cube is one of the most revolutionary artists we've had ever. His transformation as an artist is incredible, and he's somebody who, went from really fiery, revolutionary rhetoric to, okay, remember he had a song called Black Hollywood. Now he is Black Hollywood, Chuck D is, he's on Air America, right? Chuck D's on Air America. He's still very relevant as a speaker and a commentator. And Chuck D will come to your school if you pay him, and he'll curse a lot and, do his thing, But as far as, I don't know. I think, as far I don't know. I think right now is my time, and I don't even think it's my time. I don't even think I'm the new fresh rapper. I think I'm trying to head more towards classic. That's where I'm trying to go. Like there's new kids who are fresher than me, man. Like they faster and they fresher, and that's who y'all gonna be invited to y'all school soon. Yeah.
We have one down here.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you for coming. My question is regarding, I was talking to a friend of mine a while back. We were talking about hip-hop, and he said to me that hip-hop was one of the most destructive things to the black community. And I didn't really understand what he meant from that. Okay. And my thought, but basically where I'm coming from is, how do you think that hip-hop has uplifted the community, and how do you think it will? With your conscientious rap, I know you and a lot of other rappers rap differently than the mainstream rap. I just wanted you to provide arguments for why it is not, and just more, well, other than what you clearly said, but just, just like how hip hop can really change a lot of minds and really mold a lot of young people today.
Yeah, that's. It's hard for me to answer that question because it would just be hard for me to respond to somebody who said that and said it seriously, because there's so many positive things about hip-hop, just in my own experience, that would flood my brain. That would be hard to just start rattling them off. It's like, okay, it's on a musical level. listening to hip hop has gotten me into other music. When I was first listening to it, it was very sample heavy, which is not anymore. But you know, I loved it so much, I wanted to know where they got the samples from. Maybe look on the back of records and go get into jazz and funk and greatly increase my music appreciation and my record collection. My focus on words, hip hop has increased my vocabulary. I mean, I've traveled the entire world. I've been to every country, been everywhere on the strength of rapping, and I've been able to feed my family. I've been able to start a company, and I'm a small fish in this pond. So, anyone who doubts that Obama is a hip hop president is wrong. You know, like he's got a hip hop attitude and energy that comes from being around when hip hop is around. You know, it comes from him, and I'll dare say it comes from him being black and being around in the time that hip hop was around. But I don't know. That's really a tough one for me, because it's like, I mean, hip hop. I mean, to say that hip hop has destroyed the black community is to say that hip hop artists invented the word nigga. You know, is that type of backwardsness. So I don't know.
All right, we have time for one more. Sorry, she's had her hand up for a long time now, so coming down here.
Hi. So my question, it's twofold, but when you came on the scene in a really just beautiful time, but also painful, because you had to go through, as you so eloquently call, the musical cemetery of America, MCA, when, you know, Raucous got bought out. And you've actually had to move through being able to be a pure artist when you were with Raucous, and you were part of that absolutely phenomenal movement. And then you moved into now being an entrepreneur and having to deal with the business part of it. And my first question is, can you speak a little bit on that, on the movement from being an artist to being now Blacksmith? And then Blacksmith works now with, I'm not sure which of the label, is it Universal?
Warner.
Warner, I'm sorry. My bad.
It's all the same.
You know? It's one or the other. But yeah, Warner. On that. And then my second point is, and I think you would probably be able to speak more in the tune of, from the perspective of High Tech, because I think you've worked with him the most, but we were earlier talking about sampling and how, you know, the law is very restrictive on producers that are putting these beats together for the MC. And I'd love to have him here, but this is fabulous. When High Tech, when they are putting together these beats for you guys, do they find themselves very limited by what they can do, and how have you seen it change? Because it has changed so much since exactly you have come on the scene.
Yeah, I got so caught up in your second question, I want you to repeat the first half.
What was the first one? Oh, you as a business person,
right.
Moving into your...
That's right. I mean, full disclosure, I'm still learning. Because of what I've been able to do, they gave me a label deal. And with my label deal, I signed to my company, Strong Arm Steady from the West Coast, and Jean Grey from New York City. Jean Grey, yeah. The only thing that's come out through Blacksmith Warner Brothers has been my album, Eardrum. We put out, no, that's not true. We put out an album with a smaller company Warner has called ADA, which is a company that really, they do business on a much smaller scale, so the sample clearance issue is not such a big issue. The album Genius, which was produced entirely by Ninth Wonder, is all samples. Me too. And you know, we just kind of put it out. You know, just kind of put it out and reach out. You try to clear as many samples as you can on a project like that, on a small project like that. On a major label, my album Eardrum, we had to clear every sample, and it became very expensive. But as far as, you know, I spent a lot of time developing content and product because that's what I knew how to do. And in the meantime, Warner wasn't putting any sort of heart or resources or energy into anything but me as an artist, and me and Reflection Eternal, me and High Tech. So now our deal with them is just that. Is Jean Grey is still signed there. They Strong Arm Steady is not. I'm putting out Reflection Eternal with Warner. And I'm signed to do Talib Kweli albums with Warner. But my focus is on the business of Blacksmith now, which is why I started the website Year of the Blacksmith. Make sure everybody here become a member of www.yearoftheblacksmith.com, and I have stuff up there that y'all all will like, including me and Most Def's show from last week and Jean Gray's show from last week, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But that's besides the subject. As far as the sample clearance thing, you know, people should get paid for songs they wrote. You know, one of my best songs that I ever did in my career was a remake, a song called "Lonely People," which samples Eleanor Rigby. Right? Now, see, y'all know that song, but the song never came out ever. It came out on a mixtape, but it was never available. I think, you know, I think that's one of my favorite songs I've ever done. But Paul McCartney would not clear it, and I could be mad, but it's his damn song. He don't have to clear it, you know. And as an artist, as a musician, I have to respect that. And if you are going to clear it, like, my whole thing is, if I was in a position of one of these older artists, I would say send it to me. If I liked it, I would clear it, and I would say just give me my royalties, and that would be it, you know. But and that's what a lot of them do. But you have to go through the process of doing that, and so some of the best producers in our business, because they weren't selling platinum records, you know, it's hard to find outlets for them. If they're just sampling and looping and stuff like that, those days where you could just be a producer that samples and loops, those days are over. They've been over for a long time. And producers like Pharrell, and Chad, who from the Neptunes, who play a lot of their own stuff, and Dr. Dre, who very early on was just replaying samples and adding his own thing, and Kanye, who actually Kanye started by selling beats to Jermaine Dupri and Jay-Z to where he could get enough money to pay for samples. So you hear Kanye West beat, and you're like, wow, how did he get that cleared? He paid for it, $100,000, and he gets no publishing on it. But it made him one of the biggest stars in music, you know, by him doing it. So sometimes you got to be forward thinking and not be cheap and penny pinch, and understand, you know, use one thing to catapult yourself to something else. I'm sorry about my phone, y'all. I was reading my comments to y'all off my phone, so I couldn't turn it off. I wouldn't normally have my phone going off. That's what I'm just saying.
Thank you very much. On behalf of West Virginia University College of Law and West Virginia University, we would like to present you with a Coal Mountaineer. Wow.
It's beautiful that y'all gave this to me. I was already just so overwhelmed by all the love that y'all gave me, but this is even more. I appreciate it. Thank you.
We would also like to invite you, as far as the College of Law and Dean Joyce McConnell, who's here, we'd like to recognize her. But also, there is a reception for everyone who came this evening. We are very much appreciative for you being here and participating in the symposium. But we ask that our panelists who are here, if they would please rise and go out that door to be served first, and then the rest of you all afterward, as well as with the BALSA and the Sport and Entertainment Law Society. Thank you. The reception is sponsored by the Black Law Student Association.